Hey everyone, welcome back. Chapters 1441 through 1460 of the previous episode. The Battle of Xuandu reaches its climax as the celestial heavens forces, led by Heavenly Venerate Hong and other powerful figures, launch an all-out assault on the Heavenly Duke. Qin Mu and his allies, including Butcher, Tianshu, Zhehuali, and Luo Wushuang, struggle to survive the overwhelming might of the 10 Heavenly Venerates. The turning point occurs when Qin Mu's risky gamble, using the 9 prisons heart-lock technique, forces the Heavenly Duke's consciousness to break free from Heavenly Tao's shackles. This moment of clarity, combined with the intervention of the founding emperor, shifts the momentum. The founding emperor displays sword techniques that terrify even the ancient gods Taiji, while Heavenly Venerate Yu shocks the battlefield by revealing the true, hidden extent of his power, proving himself a match for the other masters. As the battle intensifies, the true stakes are revealed. The struggle is not just for the survival of the Heavenly Duke, but for the fundamental power of the universe. If possible, you can support me via PayPal or become a channel member to help me keep this channel running. Thank you. Now let's get back to the story of Tales of Herding Gods audio series. Chapter 1461 Death of the Heavenly Duke, Part 1. Heavenly Venerate Yu was a troubled youth in the early years of the Long Han dynasty. He was eccentric and eccentric. He did not care about anyone and did not care about anything. The only thing that could motivate him was to see his mother. He created the life and death divine treasure in order to see his mother. Concubine Yan released her heavenly palace and formed the great heavenly court. She stared nervously at Heavenly Venerate Yu, whose physical body was in tatters but his aura was getting stronger and stronger, she thought. The only thing holding him back is his mother. He had been quiet in Yudu for 1,000,000 years, accompanying his mother's soul. He had never come to the world of the living to stir up trouble, so he missed the struggle for power in the heavenly court. He had no part in the power of the 10th Heavenly Venerate. If he didn't have this kind of tie, she couldn't help but shiver a few times. She glanced at the heavily injured Heavenly Venerate Gong and thought, if necessary, I have to sacrifice my fellow Taoist. After all, it wasn't me who broke the mask, but Heavenly Venerate Gong. Dead or dead, it was never a multiple-choice question for Concubine Yan. Of course, this was not a multiple-choice question in Celestial Master Gong's mind. Just as she thought of this, Celestial Master Yu suddenly raised his head. The aura of the primordial spirit behind him soared, bringing with it the dark aura unique to Hades. Layer after layer of Hades worlds rapidly expanded outward and invaded Xuandu. And beneath his feet, the Yudu worlds overlapped, forming a huge Yudu domain. The Yudu domain actually began to connect with the real Yudu. This scene was extremely terrifying. When the Yudu domain connected with the real Yudu, Concubine Yan Tian and Heavenly Venerate Gong were shocked to see 2 long ox horns rising slowly from the Yudu. The 2 horns were extremely thick, like a river formed by the magma from the underground of countless worlds. They were burning fiercely and meandering down around the horns. However, the flow of the magma river was not slow. On the contrary, it was pouring down like a waterfall from the sky. It was noisy and loud. Celestial Master Yu called his lord here. Shameless. What is the Heavenly Tao doing? He actually allowed Yudu's invasion. He is really not a servant. Concubine Yan Tian was so angry that she laughed. There was no way to fight this battle anymore. This was an invasion between the oldest worlds, and Heavenly Venerate Yu was the bridge for this kind of invasion. Logically speaking, the heavenly axiom and the great Tao of Yudu were opposing each other. It could be said that they restrained each other and destroyed each other. The 2 worlds would never meet, never come into contact. Even if Heavenly Venerate Yu used a heaven-defying divine ability, the 2 worlds would never meet. However, such an impossible thing happened because of the invasion of the 10th Heavenly Venerate. Under normal circumstances, the Heavenly Tao would definitely resist the invasion of Yudu. Even if Heavenly Venerate Yu cultivated the Yudu domain, it would be obliterated by the Heavenly Tao of Xuandu. He would not be able to unleash his domain at all. Furthermore, an existence like Heavenly Venerate Yu would not be able to set foot in Xuandu at all. The Heavenly Tao of Xuandu would treat him as an intruder and destroy him as soon as possible. And now, the Heavenly Tao of Xiandu was gathered in the Heavenly Duke's body, and did its best to protect the Heavenly Duke's life. There was no heavenly Tao to resist the invasion of Yudu. All these factors caused the heavenly Tao to no longer suppress Yu Tianzuan's power. It was also unable to resist the invasion of Yudu's domain in Yudu. This was a scene that had never appeared since the creation of the universe and the formation of Xiandu. However, it appeared now, and it was a matter of course. It caught everyone off guard. When the Earth Count's two horns pierced through the sky of Xuandu, the Yuan world, the ancestral court, the four extreme heavens, and all the other worlds in the universe could see this soul-stirring scene when they raised their heads to look at the sky. The two horns that were entangled with the torrential magma river burned the sky red. This scene terrified everyone. In fact, ever since the heavenly court began to attack Xuandu, the celestial phenomena in all the worlds in the universe had begun to fall into chaos. The stars in the sky moved randomly, and the constellations did not occupy their positions. The sun and moon became elusive, and not only did the day and night turn upside down, there were even many suns appearing at the same time, or more than 10 moons revolving around a single sun in a terrifying scene. The people of the myriad realms had yet to adapt to this strange change. The horn of the Earth Count, which caused the children to stop crying and caused the gods and demons to tremble in fear, actually appeared in the sky. It was as if the end of the myriad realms had arrived. It could not help but cause people to tremble in fear. Concubine Yen Tian and Celestial Master Gong looked at each other. At this moment, whether they could kill the Heavenly Duke was no longer important. What was important was whether they could keep their lives. However, what made them terrified was that they had fallen into the Hades realm of the Heavenly Duke and could not escape. Kill the Heavenly Duke of you before the Earth Count comes here. Concubine Yen Tian shouted sternly and tore the sky apart with the sinkhole Great Abyss. On the other side, Heavenly Venerate Hong, Heaven Consort Gao, and Shi Chilua were shocked. Heavenly Duke controlled his own body, which was different from Heavenly Tao consciousness controlling his body. It was more agile and changeable. Although Heavenly Duke was powerful before, he gave people the feeling that he was following the old rules. He fought like a machine and did not know how to be flexible. Now, his moves and divine abilities were extremely changeable, although it was a Heavenly Tao divine ability. But in terms of changes, he was much better than before. The pressure on the three Heavenly Venerates suddenly increased. They were not injured in the battle with the Heavenly Duke before, but now they were already injured. Heavenly Venerate Hong was even more shocked than the other Heavenly Venerates. No one in the world knew the Heavenly Duke better than him. They knew the strengths and weaknesses of the Heavenly Duke better than him. Because he was one with the Heavenly Duke, they had been connected with each other for a long time. They fought for the same goal, which was to get rid of the shackles of the Heavenly Tao and escape from it. But now, he felt that he was no longer so connected to the Heavenly Duke. They no longer had the same mind. It was as if there was a veil separating them, making him unable to see through the Heavenly Duke's thoughts. He and the Heavenly Duke, one was the reincarnation of the Divine Soul. He was free, controlled power and enjoyed life. The other was the two souls of heaven and earth who controlled the body. They were also controlled by the Heavenly Tao and were unable to be free. Now, the Heavenly Duke's heaven and earth souls seemed to have their own thoughts and sealed him off. What made him even more alarmed was that the Heavenly Tao's will had retreated, allowing the Heavenly Duke to take control of the body. If the Heavenly Tao's will did not force itself on the Heavenly Duke's body, and was no longer above the Heavenly Duke's will, would the Heavenly Duke still need him? Would the Heavenly Duke still need him, the Celestial Master Hong? At this moment he had a disagreement with the Heavenly Duke. Not only that, he also felt that every time he was injured by the Heavenly Duke, his cultivation base and strength would weaken. This weakening came from his Tao heart. There was a huge Tao heart prison that locked his cultivation base's upper limit. Every time he was injured, his cultivation base's upper limit would be lowered. Even though he still had world-shaking power at this moment, the weakening time and time again made his Tao heart even more chaotic and flustered. The intense piercing pain from his Tao heart made him even more flustered and the pain intensified. Unknowingly, his body began to distort. The first to distort was his face. His originally kind-looking face had now become increasingly malevolent. Even Shi Chilua and Divine Emperor Langxian could not help but feel fear when they saw this scene. "We must kill the Heavenly Duke." Heavenly Master Hong's malevolent face shouted at them. Langxian and Shi Chilua frowned. This was completely different from Celestial Master Hong, who was usually calm, elegant, and carefree. Celestial Master Hong's Tao heart has been completely defeated. Shi Qilua blinked and immediately produced a divine weapon, Celestial Master Royal, and said with a smile, "Celestial Master Hong, you are stronger. Use this divine weapon." Under normal circumstances, Celestial Master Hong would definitely refuse. This was because he had already seen that Shi Qilua had tampered with the divine weapon, Celestial Master Royal. But now he was actually using his boundless mana to control the divine weapon, Celestial Master Royal. Boom boom boom. Light wheels spun and danced behind the divine weapon, Celestial Master Royal's head. Heavenly palaces appeared one after another, forming a great heavenly court. The aura of this divine weapon was violent, and its cultivation strength increased explosively. Its combat strength jumped again and again. The huge increase and the strength of the increase made Divine Emperor Longshuan's primordial spirit shudder. Shi Qilua was elated and overjoyed. Now he could finally catch the circulation path of Heavenly Venerate Hong's technique. He was the weakest among the Heavenly Venerates besides Qin Mu, because he had cultivated for a short period of time and was also the ruler of Heavenly Palace that created Father. His status was lower and he had received fewer resources, so his abilities couldn't catch up to the 10 Heavenly Venerates. He could only find another way to spy on the techniques of the other Heavenly Venerables from Divine Weapon Heavenly Venerate Royal. As long as the other Heavenly Venerates controlled Divine Weapon Heavenly Venerate Royal, he could take the opportunity to spy on their techniques. At the moment, he had already obtained the techniques of Heavenly Venerate Vast Heaven, Heaven Consort Chong, and Heavenly Venerate Fire. The 3 Heavenly Venerates had their own strengths, so it wouldn't be easy for him to integrate their techniques and turn them into his great Heavenly Court's techniques. However, for Shi Qilua, it was naturally better to use others' cultivation techniques as much as possible. He immediately felt the circulation path of the great Heavenly Venerate's cultivation technique, and he was both delighted and shocked. This is a fusion of the Heavenly Tao cultivation technique as the main theme and the other monarch cultivation techniques. There are also the results of the Founding Emperor Reform era, all sorts of acquired Great Tao, and even the Founding Emperor's Sword Tao. The Founding Emperor's cultivation technique is also included. Although it's not comprehensive, it's still very impressive. Shi Qilua glanced at Celestial Master Hong with a faint smile. During the Founding Emperor era, the Heavenly Duke supported the Founding Emperor Heavenly Court to fight against the Heavenly Court. I thought that the Heavenly Duke's goal was really to borrow the power of the Founding Emperor Heavenly Court to eliminate us. So I missed a step. The Heavenly Duke's true goal is to become Celestial Master Hong and take the opportunity to absorb the fruits of the Founding Emperor's reform, so that he can cultivate to the Heavenly Court realm one step ahead of us. Old Fox. Although she took this opportunity to verify the identity of the Heavenly Duke, she did not make it public. Instead, she continued to watch Celestial Master Hong fight the Heavenly Duke. Celestial Master Hong fully controlled the divine weapon, Celestial Master Royal, and pushed the power of this divine weapon to the extreme. Behind the divine weapon, even the martial Heavenly Palace of the martial Emperor wuxia had appeared. The results of the reform during the Founding Emperor era were vividly displayed on him. Even the Founding Emperor himself had never fused the Emperor's throne techniques of the Founding Emperor era into one, because the Founding Emperor needed to use all of his wisdom to only walk the path of the sword. If he had spent his time on other postnatal Daos, he would not have achieved what he did today. But Celestial Master Hong was different. He was also a part of the Heavenly Duke. The results of the reform during the Founding Emperor era were not hidden from the Heavenly Duke. The Heavenly Duke himself could not absorb the results of the reform, but Shi Qilua could. In a short period of time, a heavenly court formed by 35 heavenly palaces appeared behind the divine weapon Celestial Master Royal's head. Not only that, the 36th heavenly palace was also forming. This scene shocked and terrified Celestial Emperor Langxian, but it also made Shi Qilua pleasantly surprised and regretful. He peered into Celestial Master Hong's cultivation technique, and realized that although Celestial Master Hong had the 36th heavenly palace, it was not perfect. With the addition of the 36th heavenly palace, a flaw appeared in the cultivation technique. This flaw caused the pressure on the body to reach the limit of what the body could withstand. In other words, even a celestial master with such a powerful body could not withstand the pressure of the great heavenly court formed by the 36 heavenly palaces. He would definitely be crushed by the great heavenly court. In the past, Heavenly Venerate Hong did not dare to use such an imperfect cultivation technique. Now that he had the divine weapon, Heavenly Venerate Royal, he had nothing to worry about. Now the divine weapon, Heavenly Venerate Royal's strength had already surpassed Heavenly Venerate Hong's. The offensive power of his divine ability was even above that of Divine Emperor Langxian. His combat strength was actually still increasing. Divine Emperor Langxian and Shi Qilua were shocked. They did not understand why. Now that the divine weapon, Heavenly Venerate Royal, was already in the heavenly court realm, how could he still increase his strength? Shi Qilua quickly realized that this increase did not come from the heavenly palace, but from the divine halls in the heavenly court. There were 8 divine halls that were provided to the divine weapon Heavenly Lord Royal to surpass the heavenly court. The power of these 8 divine halls were 8 acquired das, and they were not in the innate das. The founding emperor reform is so amazing. Shi Qilua was so excited that he almost cried. The greatest achievement of the founding emperor reform was placed right in front of him just like that. Although he had yet to see the 72 treasured palaces defending the heavenly court's path to the Tao of the 36 heavenly palaces, he had already sensed the perfection of this path. This path, supported by the acquired great Tao, greatly reduced the pressure on the great heavenly court formed by the 36 heavenly palaces. The reform of founding emperor era was an attempt for the acquired Tao to triumph over the innate Tao. Even though the results of the reform of that era weren't as great as those of eternal peace, the seeds of the acquired Tao to triumph over the innate Tao had already been planted, however, because the duration of founding emperor era was too short. Even though the seeds sprouted, they didn't grow. The greatest achievement of the founding emperor reform was not the founding emperor's sword techniques, but the reform of the heavenly court's realm presided over by the founding emperor's number 1 celestial master, Saint Woodcutter, the heaven-smelling pavilion. Although Saint Woodcutter was a person who did not have the strength to tie a chicken with his hands, and was at the bottom of the 4 great celestial masters, his intelligence was so high that others could not compare to him. The 72 treasured palaces that assisted the 36 heavenly palaces came from him. He used 72 acquired Tao to relieve the pressure of the 36 innate Tao and reduce the damage to the body caused by the heavenly court's realm. After his modifications, theoretically, the heavenly court realm formed by 72 treasured palaces assisting 36 heavenly palaces would have more powerful magic power and higher battle prowess than the traditional heavenly court realm, so there would be no worries. However, Saint Woodcutter didn't publicize this technique wantonly. There weren't many people who knew about it, and only the former Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor Zhang Baigui had received his complete teachings. As for whether Zhang Baigui had cultivated it or not, it was unknown. What Heavenly Venerate Hong had obtained was only a remnant of the technique that Saint Woodcutter had created in the early days. Furthermore, there were quite a few hidden dangers, so it was an outdated technique. But even so, this remnant of the technique was enough for divine weapon Heavenly Venerate Royal to persist in heavenly court for a longer period of time, and the increase in his battle prowess was astonishing. Divine weapon Heavenly Venerate Royal had clashed head-on with Heavenly Duke, and in terms of strength, he was almost on par with Heavenly Duke. Such battle prowess was truly an eye-opener. In addition, Celestial Master Hong's techniques and abhijanas came from the Heavenly Tao, but were not limited to the Heavenly Tao. With him as the main offensive force against the Heavenly Duke, and with the help of the 3 Heavenly Venerates Langxian, Tianfei, and Shi Qilua, the Heavenly Duke once again fell into a disadvantageous position. Celestial Master Hong fought with speed at all costs. He felt that his strength was declining, so he had to end the battle as soon as possible. The Heavenly Duke tried his best to move and shrink his body, but the injuries on his body were increasing. However, cracks appeared on the divine weapon, Heavenly Lord Royal's body. His skin exploded and his muscles were broken. He could be crushed by the heavenly court at any time. Suddenly, the divine weapon, Heavenly Lord Royal, hit the Heavenly Duke's forehead and shook the Heavenly Duke's primordial spirit. Concubine Qi Tian took this opportunity to activate the God-slaying platform. 2 rays of saber light stabbed into the Heavenly Duke's forehead. At the same time, her spiritual sense burst out and attacked the Heavenly Duke's spiritual sense. At the same time, Divine Emperor Longshuan's divine sense also rushed into the forehead of the Heavenly Duke, almost shattering the Heavenly Duke's divine sense. Shi Chilua saw that he was at an advantage. He hurriedly controlled the other 2 divine weapons, Heavenly Lord Royal, to shrink their bodies and rush into the forehead of the Heavenly Duke. The 2 divine weapons, Heavenly Lord Royal, had 3 heads and 6 arms. Their bodies spun rapidly as they moved forward. Countless punches and kicks rained down on the Heavenly Duke's primordial spirit. The divine sense was the spiritual consciousness, while the primordial spirit was the soul. The Duke of Heaven's divine sense was almost shattered, and his primordial spirit was almost shattered by Shi Chilua. At that moment, the Heavenly Tao's consciousness sensed that the Duke of Heaven's consciousness had lost its ability to control his physical body. It immediately formed the Heavenly Tao's consciousness in the Duke of Heaven's body, controlling the Duke of Heaven's physical body through space and time. At that moment, Divine Emperor Langxian let out a stern cry and activated the Tao fruit in his heavenly court. He also sent it into the Duke of Heaven's glabella. A vast wave of Tao charm burst out and sealed the Heavenly Tao's consciousness, preventing it from descending. Celestial Master Hong stood up and flew to the Heavenly Duke's forehead. He waved his sleeve and put the 2 divine weapons, Celestial Master Royal, into it. He shook them and sent them flying. Shi Chilua was furious and said sternly, "Celestial Master Hong, you just defeated the Heavenly Duke. Are you going to turn hostile and not leave any food for fellow Taoist?" Just as Divine Emperor Langxian was about to rush into the Heavenly Duke's forehead, he suddenly saw Celestial Master Royal, the divine weapon controlled by Celestial Master Hong, ramming towards him. After being rammed by him, Divine Emperor Langxian was muddle-headed and his body was sent flying for tens of thousands of miles. He could only hear cracking sounds coming from his ribs. Qi, the divine weapon Celestial Master Royal's forehead, was hit by Shi Chilua's finger. The back of his head exploded and blood splattered all over the heavenly court. Celestial Master Yu had been pushed to the limit by Celestial Master Hong, and his body could no longer bear it. Now that his forehead exploded, his whole body suddenly exploded. Divine Emperor Langxian spat out blood. The attack power of Celestial Master Yu, who was in the complete heavenly court realm, was too fierce. Even he could not bear it. My Tao fruit. He suppressed his injuries and rushed toward the Heavenly Duke. However, he saw the Heavenly Duke standing there motionlessly. Suddenly, 2 streams of murderous aura intertwined on his forehead. With a sizzling sound, the Heavenly Duke's head was cut open on both sides, and the Heavenly Duke's skull was ripped open. That was when concubine Chang Tian charged into the Heavenly Duke's brows and destroyed the Heavenly Duke's skull from the inside. The power of this blade was extremely strong. However, along with the blade light, concubine Chang Tian flew out as well. This Heavenly Venerate was almost flattened by Heavenly Venerate Hong on the God-slaying platform. Together with the God-slaying platform, he was kicked out by Heavenly Venerate Hong. Along with concubine Chang Tian flew out streams of essence qi that soared into the sky from the Heavenly Duke's skull. The spiritual essence pierced through the sky, and the Heavenly Tao in the spiritual essence shook. The 49 Heavenly Tao in the Heavenly Duke's body began to escape. The Heavenly Duke is going to die. Shi Chilua couldn't be bothered to argue with Celestial Master Hong, and shouted joyfully. His treasure chest suddenly opened, and countless strange divine weapons flew out from it to capture the Heavenly Duke's spiritual essence, and collect the Heavenly Tao. The Heavenly Fiend energy is so strong. The Heavenly Duke is really going to die. Consort Chang Tian, who had been flattened by Celestial Master Hong on the God-slaying platform, could not help but be overjoyed. Her body swelled up and then deflated, and then it inflated back to its original state. She exerted all her strength on the God-slaying platform, and the 2 divine sabers to devour the Heavenly Fiend energy in Xian Du. The Heavenly Fiend energy was extremely strong, and it made her 2 divine sabers absorb the Heavenly Fiend energy crazily. In the distance, the giant head of the Earth Count had already appeared in Xuandu. It had the head of a bull, the face of a tiger, and the face of a tiger. It had a huge horn, and one of its palms was imprinted on Celestial Master Gong's body, while the other was holding on to concubine Yen. Celestial Master Gong and Concubine Yen were severely injured by Celestial Master Yu at all costs, and the appearance of the Earth Count was just in time to suppress the two Celestial Masters. Suddenly, the Earth Count's body shook violently. He turned around and looked in the direction of Heavenly Duke. There, red light filled the sky. Heavenly Duke's essence energy dyed Xuandu red, making countless stars as red as blood. The Earth Count's face was gloomy. His 3 eyes revealed a look of anticipation. Dao brother, have you transcended the heavenly Dao? Should I congratulate you or should I cry for you? At this moment, the Taiji diagram suddenly revolved around the Earth Count. The Earth Count's face changed slightly, and he hurriedly released the Celestial Master of Palace and Concubine Yen Tian. His palms moved left and right to block the Taiji diagram. A violent tremor was heard, and the Earth Count blocked the power of the Taiji diagram. His huge body crackled and pieces of lava fell off his body. Countless Hades ghosts cried and ran in all directions. The Earth Count hurriedly comforted the ghosts and gods, only to see 2 ancient gods, a man and a woman covered in blood, appear in front of him. Their bodies were covered in sword wounds. They picked up Yen Tianfei and flew away. This Taiji diagram was formed from ancient god Taiji's supreme treasure, the sand table. These 2 ancient gods were fighting with the founding emperor. Seeing that Yen Tianfei was injured, they rushed over to save her. However, the founding emperor's attack succeeded, and they were seriously injured. Just as Earth Count was about to reach out his hand, Heavenly Venerate Gong's injuries healed quickly. He was shocked and quickly looked over, only to see Heavenly Venerate Hao walking toward him. Behind Heavenly Venerate Hao, a figure swayed. Earth Count looked closely, and it was Heavenly Venerate Su, who had 2 horns on his head. Following behind Heavenly Venerate Hao, Heavenly Venerate Su walked toward him. His body gradually shrank and his age also became smaller. He became a little girl with 2 horns on her head, but they were blocked by 2 pigtails. Father Acho, the little girl called out to him. Daughter! Earth Count's heart trembled. The great Tao of Hades immediately turned into a dense prison rope that wrapped around his heart and tightened it. Daughter! Earth Count spat out blood and lava. His mind was in chaos. Suddenly, Heavenly Venerate Hao raised his hand, and 10,000 heavenly wheels flew out. They spun rapidly and grew larger and larger, slashing toward the center of his brows. The 10,000 heavenly wheels combined into one and turned into the innate One Qi. The innate One Qi was like a flower and extremely sharp. In the next moment, it arrived in front of the Earth Count. Earth Count, wake up! Heavenly Venerate Yu dragged his heavily injured body and flew over. He stood in front of the Earth Count and his mighty Yuan Shan rose up. He used both of his hands to block the 10,000 heavenly wheels. Immediately, he was covered in blood. His physical body and Yuan Shan burned with the Hades demonic fire. He tried his best to block the 10,000 heavenly wheels. However, his injuries were already very serious and he could not block Heavenly Venerate Hao's attack at all. A streak of sword light flew over and flashed repeatedly. At the same time, it attacked Heavenly Venerate Vast Expanse and Tai Su behind him. Heavenly Venerate Vast Expanse laughed loudly and soared into the air. He leaped over the head of the Earth Count. The moment the 2 of them flew over the Earth Count, Tai Su turned to look at the founding emperor who was holding the carefree sword. He revealed a surprised expression. You can see me? The founding emperor did not answer. He flicked his sword 3 times. Heavenly Venerate Gong, who was about to kill Heavenly Venerate Vast Expanse, suddenly burst out with sword light. His entire body was covered in sword light and he was dripping with blood. He had no choice but to follow Tai Su and flee. The sky was filled with the sky, and it became more and more intense. At this moment, all the stars in the universe became blood red, and the sky also became blood red. It was as if the sky was bleeding, and a blood waterfall could fall from the sky at any time. Even the 2 divine sabers on the god-slaying platform did not have the time to swallow such a strong murderous aura. The 2 divine sabers became more and more real in the sky's murderous aura, and they gradually took on a real form, both physical and material. The reverse scales on the 2 blood-red dragons stood up one after another. Cold light flashed as they intertwined with each other on the god-slaying platform. When the dragon scales collided, sparks flew everywhere. Concubine Qi Tian was so excited that she trembled. She immediately looked at the Heavenly Duke's body. Devouring the Heavenly Tao and the Heavenly Duke, I've refined 2 divine sabers. It makes the power of the divine saber stronger. It's definitely not weaker than Absolute Beginning's companion treasure. With that thought in mind, she immediately activated the 2 divine sabers with murderous aura and charged toward the Heavenly Duke who was frozen there. Heavenly Tao's Great Seal. In the middle of the Heavenly Duke's brows, Heavenly Venerate Hong turned a blind eye to the escaping Heavenly Tao and Heavenly Duke's essence chi. He swung his round palm, and in an instant countless Heavenly Tao seals were placed on the Tao fruit. The Tao charm of the Tao fruit was extremely strong, but no one activated it. It was instantly suppressed by Heavenly Venerate Hong. Heavenly Venerate Hong flicked his finger, and the sealed Tao fruit flew out of the Heavenly Duke's forehead. Concubine Chong Tian flew over on the ancestral court's god-slaying platform, and she saw that the shriveled Tao fruit contained the power of Heavenly Tao. Without saying anything, she used 2 divine sabers to slash at the Tao fruit. At this moment, Divine Emperor Langxian flew over. When he saw this scene, his eyes were filled with anger, and he immediately used an Absolute Beginning divine ability to attack Concubine Chong Tian. Qi Tian Consort's back exploded from this attack. Her delicate body flew out of the god-slaying platform. Then she pulled out her saber and slashed backward. 2 long blood dragons slashed at Divine Emperor Langxian's neck. Divine Emperor Langxian's head rolled down. The flesh on his neck squirmed. Another head popped out with a pop sound. He grabbed the Tao fruit and took it to float in the heavenly court. Consort Chong Tian turned around and their eyes met. Then they separated and pounced on the Heavenly Duke's body. Shi Qilua was also pouncing on him. This burly man was laughing so hard that his flowers were trembling. Devouring the Heavenly Duke's cultivation base, the Heavenly Court's realm is just around the corner. At this moment the 10,000 heavenly wheels flew past. Shi Qilua's body was cut into 2 by the 10,000 heavenly wheels. His lower body was running crazily below, while his upper body was reaching out to grab the Heavenly Duke's body. Divine Emperor Langxian was shocked and quickly turned around to defend himself. However, he saw Heavenly Emperor Absolute Beginning behind Heavenly Venerate Haotian. His expression changed drastically and Heavenly Venerate Haotian pointed at his forehead. Divine Emperor Langxian spat out blood and turned around to leave. On the other side, when Concubine Chong Tian saw Heavenly Venerate Gong flying over, she quickly retracted her 2 murderous auras. She was afraid that she would be hurt. However, she was whipped by Heavenly Venerate Gong and spun like a spinning top. Inside the Heavenly Duke's body, Celestial Master Hong's expression was calm. He looked at the Heavenly Duke's heaven soul and earth soul that was about to collapse and said in a hoarse voice, "Why did you betray yourself?" The Heavenly Duke smiled. His immortal soul collapsed and his heaven soul and earth soul collapsed. Celestial Master Hong felt a pain in his heart. He stretched out his right hand as if he wanted to condense his heaven soul and earth soul to prevent it from collapsing. However, he retracted his hand. He flicked his finger and Heavenly Duke's final consciousness collapsed. "You are no longer you. Leaving your consciousness behind will only pollute my purity." Heavenly Lord Hong let out a long sigh of relief. He felt a great sense of relief and could not help but shed tears. His primordial spirit flew out of Heavenly Lord Hong's body. It was so powerful that it quickly took over Heavenly Duke's body and began to absorb Heavenly Duke's power. "If you die, I will live on your behalf. I will fulfill your long-cherished dream, master the Heavenly Tao, transcend the Heavenly Tao, and become the ruler of this universe." Suddenly, Heavenly Master Hong's expression changed drastically. He was shocked to find that he was unable to devour and refine the Heavenly Duke's power. He was unable to refine even a tiny bit of it. The 9 hell stage emerged from his Tao heart. Countless sharp mountains and rivers appeared in the middle of the 9 hell stage. Celestial Master Hong saw himself standing on the tiny 9th stage. He could only see the gaps between the extremely sharp mountains and rivers when he looked up, but he could not see the mouth of the well. He struggled and roared, but he was unable to escape. The intense pain distorted his Tao heart, causing it to collapse and his cultivation base to plummet. At that moment, a world-shaking power rose from the soles of his feet. The Ancestor God King held the Heavenly Tao Cardinal Treasure in his hand as he broke through the Heavenly Duke's towering body and charged out from the Heavenly Duke's body. He shattered Heavenly Duke Hong's primordial spirit. Boom! A terrifying tremor came from Heavenly Duke's glabella. Ancestor God King destroyed Heavenly Duke Hong's soul in one strike. Then, the Heavenly Tao True Treasure turned into a huge hammer and smashed on Heavenly Duke Hong's head. Father God! Ancestor God King was extremely excited. He smashed at Heavenly Duke Hong's body, one strike after another. Father God, you're old. You can't beat me. Yet you still dream of ruling the universe. It's my turn, right? If you don't die, how can it be my turn? I learned this from you. I'm very good at it, right? One strike after another. Celestial Master Hong was smashed into a pile of mud. The Ancestor God King continued smashing down tirelessly. Obsession could drive a person crazy. As an Ancestor God King born from the desires of Heavenly Dukes, his repressed desires were released at this moment, causing him to go crazy and excited. He did not even see Fire Heavenly Venerate appear behind him. The moment his long-cherished wish was fulfilled, he let down his guard and relaxed his vigilance. If a person spent his entire life dreaming of achieving certain accomplishments and even faked his personality to be like the Ancestor God King for hundreds of thousands of years, the moment he achieved his long-cherished wish, it would be the moment he completely relaxed. It would also be the moment when he was at his weakest. As a Fire Heavenly Lord, how could he give up such a rare opportunity? Even if he was the same as the Ancestor God King, known as the most straightforward of the 10 Heavenly Venerates, he would still attack without hesitation. The Ancestor God King was the most unscheming of the 10 Heavenly Venerates. He would say whatever he said and say whatever he said. The Fire Heavenly Venerate was the most hateful of the 10 Heavenly Venerates. He hated the ancient gods and stood up for injustice. However, he would be the first to stand up for injustice. These two people were the most likely to become friends among the 10 Heavenly Venerates. However, the strange thing was that they did not become friends. On the contrary, their relationship was the strangest among the 10 Heavenly Venerates. They rarely spoke to each other and rarely communicated. Even when they met, they would often only exchange a few words of greetings. They were very wary of each other. They were probably the same type of people. Although they spoke a lot of languages, they were also very wary of each other because the other party was very similar to them. Fire Heavenly Venerate's Heavenly Palace and Heavenly Court rose to their limits in an instant. With the help of the 24th Firmament Tao Realm, he struck the Ancestor God King's back with his palm. Flames surged into the Ancestor God King's body. Fire spewed out of the Ancestor God King's eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. Even the Heavenly Palace and Heavenly Court were covered in flames. Even his Heavenly Fire Treasure could not suppress it. The Ancestral Court's God-slaying platform was a Tao Realm examination platform. The number of steps anyone saw when they saw the platform was related to their Tao Realm cultivation. Heavenly Venerate Hong saw 9 steps, Shi Chilua saw 12 steps, and Heavenly Venerate Fire saw 24 steps. His Tao Realm cultivation was one of the best among the 10 Heavenly Venerates. He had already begun to have some attainments in the Tao Realm when others first came into contact with the Tao Realm. He had walked very far on the Tao Fire path. It was just that he did not know that this was the Tao Realm. It was not until Founding Emperor established the Tao Realm system that he realized that he had already made some achievements in the Tao Realm. After he eliminated the Southern Emperor Vermilion Bird, his Tao Fire Tao Realm had another shocking increase. Hence, he was able to cultivate to the 24th Heavenly Tao Fire Tao Realm. He had hidden it deep enough. The Ancestor God King struggled as he tried his best to activate the Heavenly Tao Cardinal Treasure in an attempt to suppress the Tao Fire. Heavenly Lord Fire's eyes flashed as he spread his fingers. Suddenly, the Ancestor God King's limbs stiffened as he was frozen in midair. His body was in the shape of a large font. Although he held the Heavenly Tao Cardinal Treasure tightly in his hand, he was powerless to resist. Ancestor God King, if Heavenly Venerate Moon did not banish me to the Yuan world, how could I have discovered you hiding in the shady firmament world sneakily, waiting for an opportunity to launch a sneak attack? Fire Heavenly Venerate heaved a sigh of relief. His eyes flashed with a hint of excitement, but he calmly suppressed it. Ancestor God King had fulfilled his long-cherished wish. He had killed Heavenly Venerate Hong and Heavenly Duke had died. Heavenly Duke's body and Heavenly Tao were about to fall into his control, so he had let down his guard. He would not make such a mistake. Fire Celestial Master bent his index finger and suddenly, there was a crack. The Ancestor God King's right leg also bent, but not in the direction of his knee. The Ancestor God King's leg bent backward and broke with a crack. The Ancestor God King grunted and looked up at him. He sneered and said, "Fire Celestial Master, you dare to kill me? Demigods have 3 leaders. I'm one of them. If you kill me, will Langxian and Heavenly Master Hao let you off?" "That's right. Do you think you can take over the Heavenly Duke's body and steal the Heavenly Tao? You don't have the ability. You don't have the bloodline of the Heavenly Duke." Heavenly Lord Hua hesitated for a moment. He clenched his middle finger, and the Ancestor God King's left arm snapped with a crack. He was in so much pain that tears streamed down his face. Then he was vaporized by the Tao fire. The Ancestor God King endured the pain and laughed. "You and I are the same kind of people. Don't you feel like you're hurting me?" Fire Heavenly Venerate snorted coldly. "If I get rid of you, no one will be able to compete with me for the Heavenly Duke and the Heavenly Tao." His gaze was strange as he clenched his third finger. The Ancestor God King's left leg broke with a cracking sound, and he was in so much pain that tears flowed down his face. "As long as I refine the Heavenly Tao and I refine the cultivation and mana of the Southern Emperor Vermilion Bird, my strength will rise to the peak of the 10th Heavenly Venerate. It will be easy for me to cultivate to the Heavenly Court realm." Heavenly Venerate Fire clenched his little finger, and the Ancestor God King's right arm was broken. "As long as I cultivate to the Heavenly Court, I will no longer need to rely on your strength. On the contrary, you people who act according to the wind will come and kneel before me, kowtow to me." He was about to clench his thumb. When he clenched this finger, his palm would turn into a fist, and the Ancestor God King's neck would be broken. At this moment, the Ancestor God King raised his head and looked behind him with a faint smile. The corners of Fire Heavenly Venerate's eyes twitched as he stepped forward to support the Ancestor God King. He said with concern, "The God King is injured? Heavenly Venerate Hong is the reincarnation of Heavenly Duke? Damn it, he injured the God King so badly. Fortunately, Heavenly Venerate Hong has already been executed." The Ancestor God King coughed up blood and the Tao flames on his body extinguished unknowingly. He said with a smile, "It's all thanks to Heavenly Venerate Fire's timely assistance in killing Heavenly Venerate Hong that Heavenly Duke was not able to escape. Brother Hao, when did you come?" Heavenly Venerate Fire helped the Ancestor God King up, and turned around to see Heavenly Venerate Hao. Suddenly the corners of his eyes twitched. His expression changed slightly when his gaze landed behind Heavenly Venerate Hao. Heavenly Venerate Hao said with a smile, "Heavenly Venerate Fire, what did you see?" Heavenly Venerate Fire retracted his gaze and said indifferently, "I saw another Heavenly Venerate Hao." He couldn't help but look at Taisu behind Heavenly Venerate Hao. What he saw was not Heavenly Venerate Hao but another youth, a youth that was peerless in both history and the present. Heavenly Venerate Royal, who had died at the Jade Lake banquet. At this moment, Heavenly Venerate Gong walked in. His gaze landed on Heavenly Venerate Hua, and then looked at the Ancestor God King, whose limbs were all broken. Heavenly Venerate Hua's heart trembled. Heavenly Venerate Haotian looked at him with admiration and said, "As expected of my most loyal subject. How could I not value a loyal subject like you?" Heavenly Venerate Flame bowed slightly and said, "I am willing to serve Brother Hao." He straightened his back and saw the young Heavenly Venerate Royal behind Heavenly Venerate Hao looking at him with a meaningful smile. Heavenly Venerate Flame's expression did not change as he stood there steadily. Heavenly Venerate Hao smiled and said to the Ancestor God King, "The godly monarch's injuries are very serious. I can treat his injuries, but the battle between us should be over. What does the godly monarch think?" The Ancestor God King's limbs were all broken. He laughed and said, "I'm willing to accept my loss. I'm willing to be your right-hand man. I'll do my best to support you and become a great treasure." He nodded and kowtowed. Heavenly Lord Haotian laughed out loud. With a wave of his sleeve, he lifted the Ancestor God King up. The ancestor god king immediately felt that his broken limbs were healing rapidly. The Tao injuries left behind by the Tao flames on his body also dissipated very quickly. His injuries were healing at an extremely fast speed. His cultivation base was also rising. His gaze landed behind Heavenly Lord Haotian. The figures he saw were Heavenly Lord Hong and Heavenly Duke. In the blink of an eye, Heavenly Lord Hong and Heavenly Duke had merged into one and transformed into Heavenly Duke form. The ancestor god king lowered his eyes, stood up, and bowed to Heavenly Lord Haotian. He was about to bow again. Heavenly Lord Haotian quickly lifted his elbows. He smiled and said, "There's no need for that. Both of us are demigod leaders. It's fine if we bow once, but there's no need to be so courteous. From now on, the godly monarch will be my Heavenly Duke. I still have to rely on you to rule Xuandu for me and control the operation of all the stars in the universe." With that said, he laughed loudly again. The ancestral god king said, "You dare to disobey me? Godly monarch, this Heavenly Duke's body is yours. I don't want yours." Heavenly Lord Haotian said amiably, "You are in control of Xiandu, so you need this powerful body to suppress the little ones. However, I need a portion of the Heavenly Duke's heavenly Tao." The ancestor god king said, "It's all brothers. Even my life is brothers. Brother, just take it." He used to be hot-tempered, but now he was calm and steady, which made people click their tongues in wonder. Heavenly Venerate Hao nodded slightly, and his gaze fell on Heavenly Venerate Hua. He said gently, "Brother Hua, you saved the ancestor god king, and you have done a great deed. Logically speaking, you should be rewarded according to your merits. However, there are only so many benefits in Xuandu, so I can't give them to you. Brother, don't take it to heart." Heavenly Venerate Hua bowed and said, "How would I dare to have extravagant hopes?" He glanced at Heavenly Venerate Hong's smashed corpse, which was surrounded by many heavenly Dao weapons, and said, "Brother Hao, can these heavenly Dao weapons?" Heavenly Venerate Hao shook his head regretfully. He said, "I can't give them to you." Heavenly Venerate Gong's contribution was even greater. In order to eradicate the Heavenly Duke, he fought with Yu Qin and Yu. These heavenly Dao soldiers were given to Heavenly Venerate Gong. If you think that your contribution is greater than hers, I can share it with you. Heavenly Venerate Fire hurriedly shook his head and said, "I don't dare to compete with Heavenly Venerate Gong." Then where are Qin Yu and Lang? At this moment, concubine Yen Tian's voice was heard. Yu was seriously injured and was brought back to Yudu by Earth Count. Qin Yu and Lang saw that Heavenly Venerate was dead and their fighting spirit had disappeared. They retreated. "Even if they came to kill us, they wouldn't be our match." She walked in with big strides. Ancient God Taiji was beside her on both sides. Behind Ancient God Taiji was concubine Qi Tian, who had been beaten bloody by Heavenly Venerate of Gong, and Divine Emperor Langxian, whose forehead had been pierced by Heavenly Venerate of Hao, and Shi Chilua, who had been cut in half by Celestial Master Hao. These people were all injured. Even Ancient God Taiji had sword wounds on his body, and concubine Yen was also seriously injured. They were divided into two groups to fight against each other. Celestial Master Hao did not care. He smiled and said, "The two concubines, the Divine Emperor, and Palace Master Shi have all contributed greatly. In that case, we will share the benefits of Xuandu with you. Since Celestial Master Su, Celestial Master Shao did not come, there is no need to consider them." Shi Chilua snorted coldly and was trying to reattach his lower body. He said softly, "Unfilial son." Heavenly Venerate Vast raised his eyebrows but didn't say anything. Heavenly Venerate Fire bowed and said, "Everyone, I won't take any of Xiandu's benefits. There's still one thing the Heavenly Court has to do. I have to rush back." Heavenly Venerate Vast nodded and said with a smile, "Go ahead. Be careful on your way." Heavenly Venerate Fire took his leave and turned into a beam of fire that left into the distance. At that moment in Heavenly Yin World, Empress Tian Yin was carefully holding a clay figurine that looked exactly the same as Heavenly Duke. Empress Tian Yin's body was huge, and the clay figurine she was holding was the size of an ordinary person. Empress is really good. Qin Mu carefully examined the small clay figurine that Empress Tian Yin was holding and said with a smile, "It really looks like it. Who would have expected that Heavenly Yin was a shadow that Xiandu couldn't shine on? The dark side of Xiandu. And yet Empress was Heavenly Duke's savior. Consort Tianyin said in delight. You still know how to praise people. Actually, I'm just a little skillful with my hands. She lightly blew on it, and the little clay figurine came to life from the clay figurine. Qin Mu stretched out his palm, and his 5 fingers jumped, transforming into a divine art of creation. He tapped on the clay figurine, and it instantly transformed from a clay figurine into a body of flesh and blood. Qin Mu raised his hand, and the vertical eye in the heart of his brows opened. His fingertip lightly tapped on the vertical eye, and the pupil of the vertical eye split open, revealing a drop of the crystal form of the Heavenly Duke's heavenly eye. Qin Mu placed the drop of crystal form in the heart of the earthen man's brows and executed his path skill, turning it into an eye that drilled into the eyebrows of the earthen man. Consort Tianyin waited for him to execute Soul Guide, and when the execution was done, the two of them joined hands to reconstruct their souls. The 3 souls of Heavenly Duke gradually took shape. Celestial Master Hong stood in the light, his shadows flickering as he called out, Celestial Master Mu, I have your promissory note in my hand, and you still owe me a favor. Where's the promissory note? Qin Mu stretched out his hand and asked. Celestial Master Hong was stunned and said, It was shattered by the unfilial son, ancestral God King. Only when the promissory note arrives will I admit it. Otherwise, there's no proof for empty words. Anyone can come and look for me to do something. Qin Mu flicked his finger and Celestial Master Hong's soul shattered. Qin Mu injected the other 2 souls of Heavenly Duke into the body of the clay golem. The clay golem Heavenly Duke instantly had a soul and slowly opened his eyes. Qin Mu smiled. Congratulations, Heavenly Duke. You have broken away from the Heavenly Tao and regained your freedom. Earth Count is waiting for you. The resurrected Heavenly Duke stretched his body, and the boundless power in his body vanished. It was replaced by a mortal body, which made him not quite used to it. Furthermore, when Qin Mu and Consort Tianyin had molded his soul, they had also given him a divine soul and added 7 souls. This divine soul wasn't Celestial Master Hong, but a soul created using the path of Heavenly Yin. It was still a piece of white paper without any consciousness. He had been an ancient god in the past, so he only had 3 souls and no 7 souls. Now that he had 7 souls, he was a little curious. He hadn't gotten used to 7 souls yet. In the past, he had been an innate divine saint, the strongest ancient god. He had been high up in the sky, and even when he had split his incarnations, they would float in the sky and rarely land on the ground. Now his feet were on the ground, stepping on the soil. The touch from his feet and toes made him curious. He bent down and reached out to touch the soil between his toes. He put it under his nose and smelled it. Goddess Tianyin revealed a look of disdain and did not hide it. Not far away, Luo Wushuang looked down and pretended not to see anything. Shahuali's eyes almost popped out. The butcher and Heavenly King Tianshu looked at each other and smiled. Heavenly Duke smiled and stretched out his palm to carefully examine his 5 fingers before carefully examining his palm lines. Qin Mu urged him. Dao brother, Earth Count is still waiting for you. Only then did Heavenly Duke come back to his senses and bow to thank the 2 of them. He then bowed to Butcher and the rest. Butcher asked, Heavenly Duke, how do you feel after becoming immortal? Do you feel disappointed? I feel a sense of loss. Heavenly Duke did not hide it, he said. In the past, my strength was too great. Now, I only have the strength of the souls of the heavens and the earth. My physical body is no different from immortals, so I naturally feel a sense of loss. Tai told me that I would be able to break free from the shackles of the heavenly Tao. I thought that I would be able to transcend and achieve the Tao like him. I did not expect that I would end up transcending like this. Butcher said. You were lofty in the past, but you couldn't surpass heavenly Tao. Now that you have become immortal, you have the possibility of transcending. Heavenly Duke smiled. Perhaps. Heavenly King Tianshu stood up and said, Heavenly Duke, I'll send you to Yudu to meet Earth Count. Heavenly Duke followed him and the 2 of them walked out of Heavenly Yin world. Tianshu planned to open the gate of heaven influence, but Qin Mu followed. Heavenly King, Yudu wants to kill me, so I can't go to Yudu. Help me take a look at Heavenly Venerate Yudu's injuries. I'm going to the ancestral court this time to invite my lord to Yudu to treat Heavenly Venerate Yudu's injuries, so I hope Heavenly King can help me. Tianshu acknowledged. Heavenly Duke is dead, and Heavenly Tao belongs to 10th Heavenly Venerate. His cultivation has greatly improved, so he will definitely create a great pressure on Carefree Village. I'm afraid I won't be able to stay in Yudu for too long. After receiving Eternal Peace Apothecary, I'll have to return to Carefree Village. Qinmu hesitated for a moment before saying, staying in Carefree Village for a long time isn't a good plan. Even if 10th Heavenly Venerate can't attack Carefree Village for the time being, it doesn't mean that he won't attack it in the future. Destroying the Void Bridge isn't difficult for 10th Heavenly Venerate now. That's why Heavenly Venerate you followed Founding Emperor to Carefree Village to guard it. Tianshu sighed ruefully and said, they have already made preparations. The Void Bridge is easy to defend but hard to attack. If 10th Heavenly Venerate wants to attack that place, it won't be easier than attacking Mysterious Capital. He brought the revived Heavenly Palace into Gate of Heaven influence and disappeared. Qinmu watched them leave and looked at Butcher, Shahuali Lua Wushuang, and the rest who were walking over. He bowed to the three of them and said, I'll have to trouble all of you to spare your lives to participate in this battle with me. I'll be eternally grateful. Shahuali and Lua Wushuang hurriedly returned the bow. Lua Wushuang said with a straight face, there's no such thing as trouble where morality is concerned. Even Heavenly Venerate doesn't care about his own safety, so what about us? Shahuali caressed the demon knife and chuckled. I've had a great time with the dragon tooth. Heavenly Venerate has already chopped it, so I finally have the capital to brag to the future generations. The demon knife and dragon tooth were very comfortable. After drinking the blood of Heavenly Venerate, the demon knife also grew. Butcher walked forward and said, you have to be more careful. If you want to chop people again in the future, call us. Qinmu nodded his head heavily. The three of them left with big strides. Shahuali turned back and waved his hand. Remember to call us. Qinmu laughed loudly and watched them leave. When their figures disappeared, Qinmu said, let's go. Okay. A cold and clear voice came from his side, but the owner of the voice was nowhere to be seen. He could only see a shadow beside Qinmu's feet. Yudu. Tianshu sent Heavenly Duke to the heart of Earth Count's brows, and immediately went to Sacred King Tianqiren's manor to seek an audience with Heavenly Venerate you to check on his injuries. In the hall on the platform in the heart of Earth Count, Heavenly Duke's figure was too short compared to Earth Count's primordial spirit. He could only raise his head to look at his fellow Taoist. You've transcended and been freed. I'm very envious. The Earthen Count's expression was calm, but there were flames flickering in his eyes. He said, you're a living being now. You have 3 souls, 7 spirits, your own thoughts, your own path, your emotions, your joy, sorrow, joy, and joy. You don't have to be controlled by the great Tao. I don't know when I'll be able to be freed like you. The Duke of Heaven said. Now I can feel the myriad of emotions in the world. Unknowingly, my understanding of the Heavenly Tao has increased by another level. In the past, I was born from the Heavenly Tao and controlled the Heavenly Tao. However, I did not know why. Now I am not. Instead, my understanding has become deeper. One gain, one loss. I actually have a strange feeling. Earth Count said happily. You are one step closer to becoming a Tao. If that is the case, then you should be able to guess the reason why I invited you here, right? The Duke of Heaven smiled and said, when you were alive you did evil, but after you die you have to settle the score. This is the rule of Hades. When the Duke of Heaven dies, you have to settle the score for the sins that the Duke of Heaven committed when he was alive. The Earth Count is fair and impartial. The reason why he invited me here should be because of this matter. The Earth Count said solemnly. During the battle of Celestial Master Hong in Xuandu, he killed countless people. The lives of those who died in his hands are countless. The resentment of the dead in Xuandu is monstrous. According to the laws of Hades, we should capture him, punish him, and suffer in order to wash away the sins on his body. Celestial Master Hong is dead. Although Celestial Master Hong and Tao Brother are one body, they are different souls. Therefore, Tao Brother, please come and ask about the case of Celestial Master Hong. Heavenly Duke shook his head and said frankly, Tao friend, you don't have to be biased towards me. I am me, and Celestial Master Hong is also me. Countless people died in the Battle of Xuandu. They should all be blamed on me. I am willing to be punished. The Earth Count hesitated. You are now a living person, and Hades rarely punishes the living. The Heavenly Duke said. But I have also punished the living before. Let me bear my sins and don't make things difficult for you. The Earth Count nodded and summoned a ghost king. The dead in Xiandu form boundless karmic fire. Please go and burn it. The Heavenly Duke stood up and followed the ghost king. Earth Count watched him leave, and Heavenly King Tianshu walked over. When he saw the Heavenly Duke being taken away by the ghost king, he asked in astonishment, "Where is he going?" He found his own path and went to atone for his sins. It's also to redeem himself. Earth Count looked at him and said, Heavenly Venerate Mu opened the gate of heaven and earth in the ancestral court. He's probably sending people over to treat Heavenly Venerate Yu's injuries. He can't step into Yudu, so I'll send you there to receive him. Heavenly King Tianshu stood in his palm and came to the place of Yudu in the ancestral court not long after. There was a heaven gate standing there. An apothecary was standing at the door looking around. However, Qin Mu was nowhere to be seen. Where's Heavenly Venerate Mu? Tianshu asked. He ran away and left this divine art here. Apothecary said unhappily. He's in such a hurry, I don't know what he's going to do. He marked his collar and muttered. This Yudu is full of ghostly qi. Tianshu was puzzled. Tianzuan Mu just went through the Battle of Xuandu. Where did he run off to this time? In the sky above the ancestral court, the heavenly court suppressed the fate of the ancestral court. At this time, not long after the Battle of Xuandu ended, Celestial Master Hong was dead, Celestial Master Shao was exiled, and only Celestial Master Su was left to guard the heavenly court. However, Celestial Master Su did not stay in the heavenly court. Instead, he stood on the surface of the sea in the sky and stared at the surface of the sea. The surface of the sea was like a mirror, reflecting the battle situation in Xuandu. After the dust of the Battle of Xiandu settled, Heavenly Venerate Su shifted her gaze and returned to the heavenly court. Before she arrived at the heavenly court, she heard an uproar in the heavenly court. She saw countless heavenly soldiers and generals who were guarding the heavenly court searching for her. Heavenly Venerate Su went forward to inquire. The divine priest hurriedly reported. Something bad has happened. The heavenly court has been robbed. A thief has come. Heavenly Venerate Su hurriedly asked. What is missing? Someone broke into Jade Capital City and entered the harem to steal the treasure. When Heavenly Venerate Su heard this, his heart trembled. Could it be that Heavenly Venerate Mu came to steal the eggshell of the Heavenly Emperor? The divine priest continued. He stole a divine hall. We were patrolling just now and discovered that incense hall had disappeared without a trace. When Heavenly Venerate Su heard that it wasn't Qin Mu who had come to steal the eggshell of the Heavenly Emperor, he let out a sigh of relief. When he suddenly heard that incense hall had been stolen, his heart couldn't help tightening. Incense hall has been stolen, she thought to herself. It was said that Incense Hall was a place where the souls of many extraordinary gods and devils were suppressed. Heavenly Venerate Vast Heaven and the rest were extremely secretive about it, and the things that were suppressed in it had never been mentioned to me. They only asked me to help them add seals. Heavenly Venerate Fire had even used this hall to take away the souls of the Southern Emperor, preventing Heavenly Venerate Mu from reviving him and breaking his reputation as eternal great mage. Could it be that Heavenly Venerate Mu stole it? She was slightly suspicious. Qin Mu had participated in the Battle of Xiandu, so no matter how fast he was, it was impossible for him to go to the Heaven Court to steal the treasure so quickly. Furthermore, if Qin Mu had come to steal the treasure, he must have gone to the sacrificial altar of Heavenly Emperor's birth to steal the eggshell of absolute beginning. Yet this thief didn't take the eggshell of Heavenly Emperor. Yet he had stolen the fragrant cloak hall. It was truly a little strange. She did not know that there was a shortcut between Xuandu and the Yuan world, the Shady Firmament world. If she passed through the Shady Firmament world, she could quickly return to the Yuan world from Xuandu and set off from the Spiritual Energy Mutual Shift Bridge in the Yuan world. Then she could arrive at the Ancestral Court's Heavenly Court in the shortest time possible. The Incense Burner Temple had little to do with her, but Heavenly Venerate Void was not nervous. He ordered the Divine Constabulary Camp to conduct a thorough search, he said. The incense-wearing hall is extremely huge. If he suddenly disappeared and was discovered by you, then he must not have left in time. He must have used the path of change to hide in the heavenly court. As long as he did not leave the heavenly court, there was no need to worry about him escaping. I have the soul-beckoning mirror here. No matter how he changes, I can use this mirror to reveal his true form. The divine investigator camp obtained the soul-beckoning mirror and searched around. Heavenly Venerate Su sat down and thought. They stayed in Xuandu to divide the benefits, but I didn't have a share. Oh right, the heaven is a thief and stole the incense-wearing hall. Why don't I be a thief too? She walked quietly to the harem and headed straight for the altar where the heavenly monarch was born. After I obtained the absolute beginning eggshell, I can say that it was stolen by the thief of the incense palace. Such a treasure is not inferior to the benefits of Xuandu. She went to steal the other half of the absolute beginning eggshell. When she arrived at the altar where the heavenly emperor was born, Heavenly Master Su looked over and suddenly felt his limbs turn cold. The altar was empty. The other half of the absolute beginning eggshell also disappeared. Who dares to steal my treasure? Heavenly Venerate Void was furious. In the heavenly court there was a person who kept changing. Sometimes he turned into a bird or a beast, sometimes he turned into a worm or a fish. When he squatted at the corner of the wall, he turned into a tender grass, and when he stood in the garden, he turned into a flower tree. He kept changing his way out of the heavenly court. The divine constabulary activated the soul-beckoning mirror and shone it around. Suddenly, the mirror went out of control and floated in the sky with a whoosh. The mirror shone brightly, and the light covered an extremely wide area. With a buzz, the entire Jade capital was covered in the light of the mirror. Heavenly Venerate Su was filled with killing intent as he stood on top of the soul-beckoning mirror and looked at the surface of the mirror to see what was happening in U capital. Anyone who used a transformation technique would turn into their original form with a bang when the light from the mirror shone on them. There were many gods and devils in the heavenly court who had become gods. There were many demonic cultivators and demonic cultivators. Their appearances were usually ferocious, but now that the mirror shone on them, they all revealed their true forms. There were truly demons and monsters running rampant in U capital. There were many beautiful concubines and palace maids in the heavenly emperor's harem. Some of them were taking a bath, while some of them were having sex with the heavenly deities. When they were reflected in the mirror, they were immediately thrown into chaos. Cold sweat broke out on Heavenly Venerate Su's forehead. The heavenly court was usually very sacred and solemn. However, when she reflected in the mirror, all kinds of darkness appeared. It was difficult to clean it up. There were too many chaotic scenes here, and even she could not tell which one was the thief who stole the heavenly emperor's eggshell and the fragrant cloak palace. At this time, a young man had already jumped into the heavenly river and turned into a big kuan, leisurely diving into the water and swimming out of the heavenly court. When he arrived at the South Heaven Gate, the big kuan jumped over the South Heaven Gate. When the gods guarding the South Heaven Gate looked up and saw this scene, they all cheered. The great kuan fell into the heavenly river and splashed a huge amount of water. When it sank into the water, it turned into a fish dragon and sneaked away. It was unknown how far the fish dragon traveled. It turned into a giant crab of the heavenly river and climbed up the river bank. The giant crab shook the water on its body and turned into a young man. It let out a long sigh and took out a divine hall to have a look. It revealed a happy expression. It hurriedly put it back into its tautai bag and rushed forward. The young man was very fast. He left the heavenly court and planned to go back along the heavenly river to the heavenly sea. The heavenly river started in the heavenly sea. When he was halfway there, he suddenly felt that the sky was getting hotter. He hurriedly looked up and saw a tall and lofty celestial venerable standing in front of him. The fire behind his head was like a wheel. His face was sad and happy at the same time. His eyes fell on him. Fire. The youth's gaze met that of Heavenly Venerate Fires. He was slightly startled, then he smiled and said, "Heavenly Venerate Fire, is that you?" The muscles in the corners of Heavenly Venerate Fire's eyes twitched. He stared at the youth in a daze and said in a hoarse voice, "Heavenly Venerate Royal Big Brother, you've really come back to life." His body could not help but shrink, and he seemed to have become the Heavenly Venerate Fire on the Jade Lake. He stared blankly at his elder brother, whom he admired. That youth was Lan Yutian. When he saw him, he could not help but feel energized. His gaze was warm and magnificent. He smiled and said, "I'm back. Fire Heavenly Venerate. I stole my remnant soul. The old me is back." He was in high spirits. He smiled and said, "I didn't expect that we could meet again after 1,000,000 years. In this world, demigods are still in charge. What's the difference between demigods and ancient gods? We humans are still their food." His eyes were eager, as if he was replaying the powerful influence of Heavenly Lord Royal on the Jade Lake. His bearing was also extraordinary, but he gave people a sense of closeness. He had the temperament of a natural leader. "Heavenly Lord of Fire, I need you." Lan Yutian reached out his hand and said sincerely, "Come on, let's do it together. For the sake of the human race, let's overthrow this rotten world." However, Fire Heavenly Venerate did not reach out his hand. The fire in his eyes gradually dimmed. He said softly, "Big Brother Lan, you were the person I respected the most in the past. You are the leader of the human race and the big brother of all the Heavenly Venerates. As the leader, no one would disobey you. We are all willing to follow you and fight together with you, even at the cost of our lives." Lan Yutian did not withdraw his hand. He was still eagerly waiting for his response. The Fire Heavenly Venerate choked with sobs. "When you died, I swore that I would avenge you. I would make the murderer pay with his blood. But brother, your dream is too vague and idealistic. What you want to achieve will never be achieved. You will only be killed." His voice became louder and louder. The wheel of fire spinning behind his head became faster and faster. It stirred up the torrential water of the heavenly river, evaporating the water vapor and turning it into a thick fog that filled the heavenly river. Lan Yutian frowned slightly and said, "Fire, as long as you and I work together, as long as we humans work together, there's nothing we can't do." "No, we can't do it," Heavenly Master Fire shouted. "Humans are inherently inferior to other races, and they will never be able to stand up. Humans cannot rely on their own strength. Humans can only rely on demigods, and only by relying on demigods can they survive in this cruel world. Only my path is the right path. The current human race is many times better than the human race when you were their leader. Don't resist the heavenly court anymore." His expression was close to madness. He practically shouted at Lan Yutian, "Don't use your ideals to frame the human race anymore. You will only be killed again. The human race will also fall into disaster again because of you, because of people like you." He clenched his fists and said sternly, "Power, the truth of this world, the great Tao of this world, only power. The human race has no power, so they have to rely on power." "You have changed," Lan Yutian said calmly. "I haven't changed." Fire Heavenly Venerate roared, but he gradually calmed down. He chuckled and said, "I have never changed. I just learned to be smarter. Brother, you are the person I respect the most. Give up your ideals and come to my side. I will protect you well. In the future, I will also kill your enemy." Lan Yutian strode past him and shook his head. "Different paths do not conspire together. Fire Heavenly Venerate, from today onwards, you do not need to call me brother. You do not need to avenge me." Chi. A palm pierced through his back and out of his chest. The 5 fingers of the palm gripped his heart tightly. The hand was trembling, and so was the Heavenly Venerate of Fire behind him. Lan Yutian was in disbelief. He turned around and saw that the Heavenly Venerate of Fire's face was covered in tears. The tears and the mist of the heavenly river were evaporated by the heat from his body. "Brother, you're dead. You're dead, aren't you? Why are you still alive? Isn't it good that you're dead?" The Fire Heavenly Venerate leaned against Lan Yutian's ear and panted heavily. His face was distorted. He chuckled and said, "You're dead. You're still the perfect brother in my heart, the perfect big brother. If you come back to life, it'll only make things difficult for me. I don't know what to do with you. You'd better die. You'd better turn into ashes, or keep your perfect image in my heart." His palm gradually exerted force and crushed Lan Yutian's heart. The Tao fire began to devour Lan Yutian's body. "You should understand me. You must understand me, right?" Heavenly Master Fire's face became even more twisted and distorted. He was panting heavily. He chuckled and said, "Don't worry. I will avenge you. I will. If you have a spirit in the sky. No, Heavenly Master Mu will summon your soul again. I can't let you have a spirit in the sky. He rummaged through Lan Yutian's corpse. Where's the incense temple? Quickly take it out. Seal you in the incense temple so that he can't resurrect you. Incense temple. He found the incense temple from the burning Taotai sack. It was burning. The fire celestial master was stunned. The incense temple was the most powerful sealed hall formed by the most powerful god's power. It couldn't be ignited by his Tao fire. He looked at Lan Yutian's corpse. The flesh and blood of the corpse had been burned into ashes, but the ashes had also dispersed, leaving nothing behind. Divine consciousness illusion. The muscles on Heavenly Venerate Fire's face twitched. The fire wind blew away the fog on the heavenly river. At that moment he saw Lan Yutian standing on the river in the distance. Beside him was Qin Mu, and beside him was God King Lang Bao. On the heavenly river the wind whistled, but no one spoke for a long time. God King Lang Bao broke the silence and said softly, Heavenly Venerate Mu, I've done what you asked me to do. Are you satisfied? Very satisfied. Qin Mu said indifferently, I can give up now. What about you, Heavenly Venerate Royal? Lan Yutian shook his head. Brother, there's no Heavenly Venerate Royal here. Qin Mu was slightly stunned. He looked at Lan Yutian and didn't say anything. Since Lan Yutian had already stolen the clove incense hall, then whether he fused with Celestial Emperor's remnant soul and chose to become Celestial Emperor was his own matter. Qin Mu wouldn't make the decision for him. Qin Mu was very gratified. Lan Yutian had grown up, and he wasn't that little brat who always stayed by his side. He had the qualifications and heart to deal with some matters. As for God King Lang Bao, he had been invited by Qin Mu. Lang Bao hadn't returned to Carefree Village with founding Emperor Moon Heavenly Venerate. The reason why Qin Mu had invited her to stay was to let him see Fire Heavenly Venerate clearly and make him give up. It also made Lan Yutian take precautions in advance. Lang Bao's divine consciousness was vast. If it was Qin Mu, he could have used his divine consciousness to create an illusion to replace Lan Yutian when Fire Heavenly Venerate's mind was shaken. Only Lang Bao or Palace Heavenly Venerate could do that. After all, Fire Heavenly Venerate was a Heavenly Venerate, and he also had extraordinary attainments in Tao realm. He stood on the heavenly river and looked at them with a wooden expression. Let's go, Qin Mu said softly without looking at him. The three of them took a step forward and were about to leave when Fire Heavenly Venerate suddenly laughed loudly. His laughter shook the mountains and rivers. Heavenly Venerate Mu, you are a scoundrel. You are only qualified and only dare to use such a small trick to fool me. You don't have any ability. At most you can only use these small tricks. Are you trying to humiliate me? His voice was like rolling thunder, causing the heavenly river to jump as well. With your little tricks, I don't take you to heart at all. In my eyes, all you have left is the word laughable. God King Lang Bao looked at Qin Mu and revealed an inquiring expression. Qin Mu shook his head. It's just the anger of an incompetent person. There's no need to pay attention to it. We only need to be wary of his anger from embarrassment. Heavenly Venerate Fire looked at their backs, and his face twisted. The scorching flames behind his head burned the sky as well as his face. His body grew bigger and bigger and he sneered. How many things have I done for the human race? My meritorious deeds cannot be wiped out with just a little trick of yours. He took a step forward and caught up with Qin Mu and the rest. His body became hotter and hotter, and raging flames burned around him. However, his voice became colder and colder. The early years of Dragon Han, what era of despair was that? That's right, Celestial Emperor was my elder brother. I was also in great pain when he died, but I saw even higher and farther. I saw the power and terror of the ancient gods of that era. I saw the power and terror of the demigods. To eradicate the ancient gods and protect the human race, I could only rely on the demigods. Did you think that in that era, you could accomplish something with just the 5 surviving celestial masters of Dragon Han? Impossible. At that time Ling Yu and Yun were just minor figures. In 5 to 600,000 years, the strongest human expert was only at the Emperor throne realm. Not to mention the Celestial Emperor personally making a move. Even any ancient god or emperor would be able to annihilate the human race and Ling Yu and Yu Yun dozens to hundreds of times. His footsteps were heavy. Wherever he stepped, the heavenly river evaporated, and the evaporated river water was also ignited by his Dao fire. Therefore, for the sake of the human race, I had to kill Heavenly Venerate Yun. I was also very sad to kill him. But he understood me. Only he understood what I had done. He never blamed me. Because he knew that what I did was right. What I did was the right path. Do you think that you can defy the heavens and contend with the ancient gods in the age of Crimson Bright? You can't. In the age of Crimson Bright, more than 10 human emperors wanted to overturn the heavens. To tell you the truth, the strength of the human race is not even comparable to a strand of hair on the heavenly court's leg. That's why I could only personally go out and encircle and annihilate Emperor Ming. That's right, it was I who saw Emperor Ming's weakness and got Son of Heavenin to kill him. Because I can't let Emperor Ming destroy the entire human race and destroy the good situation that I've worked so hard to build. He clenched his fists and stared at the backs of Qin Mu and the rest in front of him. His voice seemed to have been burned hoarse by the Dao fire burning in his body. Is the era of High Emperor so great? Great. However, the 10 heavenly venerates power had already been established. Even the ancient gods were unable to contend with the demigods. They could only fall silent one by one. Demigods were even more powerful than the ancient gods. On the other hand, Heavenly Venerate Ling Tian and Heavenly Venerate Yu dreamed of overturning the heavens and overthrowing the demigods. This is a pipe dream. The strength of the demigods is already so great that they can easily destroy the human race. I can't let Heavenly Venerate Ling and Heavenly Venerate Yu, these two women, bury the human race, so I made the decision to heavily injure Heavenly Venerate Yu. Heavenly Venerate Ling's death is also related to me. I was also the one who led the army to destroy High Emperor Celestial Heavens, but it was all worth it. Qin Mu and the rest walked to the origin of the heavenly river, and came to the surface of the sea. When godly King Lang Er's footsteps landed, the sea didn't have any ripples, only ripples that gently spread out in all directions. Lan Yutian walked on the surface of the sea, but there wasn't even the slightest ripple. Qin Mu landed on the sky sea, and the waves gradually calmed down. He looked at the surface of the sea and saw Xiandu. The stars and constellations of the universe, as well as the magnificence of billions of galaxies, were all in his eyes. Boom! Heavenly Venerate Fire's body landed on the sky sea. He was half kneeling on the surface of the sea, and his palms supported the surface of the sea. The waves rose and violent winds and waves roared. Thunder and lightning intersected in the sky, and bolts of lightning were like swords. They cleaved down from the dense black clouds and shuttled through the huge waves. A huge flame wheel spun in the tsunami, and bolts of lightning passed through it. They were ignited by the flames and turned into lightning and fire with astonishing power. Fire Heavenly Venerate slowly stood up, and the flame wheel behind his head also rose higher and higher in the huge waves. His face was huge and he looked down at Qin Mu and the other two who were walking on the sea. His voice couldn't be suppressed even by the sound of thunder and waves. Founding Emperor era was the puppet that the ancient gods supported. Founding Emperor was the puppet of the Heavenly Duke, Earth Count, and the 4 ancient gods. Qin Yi was a person who fished for fame. If he was allowed to live, he would only bring the human race back to the era of Dragon and Han. Heavenly Venerate Fire took a step forward and came behind Qin Mu and the rest. Flames surged into the sky, burning the sky black like a painting, revealing huge holes. I've just established my footing in the Heaven Court and made some achievements in South Heaven, and you all jumped out one by one. You all want to resist and drag me down with you. Have you all considered for me? Heavenly Venerate Fire shouted at the top of his lungs. His eyes were crimson red, and blazing Dao fire emanated from them. He said sternly, "Every time I have a little foundation in Heavenly Venerate 10, all of you want to rebel." Heavenly Venerate Cloud rebelled. Red Emperor Ming Emperor rebelled. Heavenly Venerate Moonling rebelled. Qin Yi rebelled, and even you Qin Mu rebelled against me. You even resurrected my elder brother, Heavenly Venerate Imperial, and joined hands with him to rebel against me. What qualifications do you Qin Mu have? Whoosh! His palm passed through layers of thunderclouds and ignited the thick and black thunderclouds, turning them into fire clouds that filled the sky. Blocking the sky and smacking towards Qin Mu and the rest, he sneered. All of you want to rebel and destroy the good situation that I have painstakingly built, so I'll send all of you to your deaths. Heavenly Venerate Fire's magic power towered into the sky and absorbed the power of the vermilion bird of South Emperor, making his magic power incomparably powerful and allowing his comprehension of Dao fire to reach the 24th heavenly Dao realm. This strike of his was bound to burn Lan Yuqian, Qin Mu, and Divine King Lang Bao to ashes and let the three of them die without a burial ground. He couldn't tolerate such blasphemy from Qin Mu. He couldn't tolerate God King Lang here using the illusion of divine consciousness to peel open his heart and show his ugly and sinful side in front of Lan Yuqian. He couldn't tolerate Lan Yuqian seeing his betrayal with his own eyes and seeing him killing Heavenly Venerate You in the illusion. Killing these three people wouldn't make him taller and more majestic, nor would it give him any benefits. However, it would make his heart feel better. Qin Mu was dead, Lan Yuqian was dead, and God King Lang Bao was dead. Only then would the people of the world not know his secrets and not know his heart. To him, digging out his heart and showing it to others was an unbearable thing. Just as his palm was about to cover the three of them, the heavenly palaces behind God King Lang Bao's head suddenly swayed. Divine consciousness burst forth, and the powerful divine consciousness brought Qin Mu and the rest through 35 layers of void. Her divine art burst forth, but it didn't attack Heavenly Venerate Fire. Instead, it blasted forward. At the instant her divine consciousness blasted forward, Qin Mu's corporeal body expanded, and his spirit embryo divine treasure territory expanded outward. Xiandu rose into the sky and Yudu sank to the ground. The four poles stood in all directions, and Yuandu, the ancestral court, and the myriad worlds of the heavens appeared one after another. He instantly transformed into the form of a four-faced god. He was facing all directions and all angles. His palm was spread out, and Divine King Lang Bao was standing in the center of his palm. He was enveloped by the domain of his divine treasures. The domain of his divine treasures spread out, and Divine King Lang Bao immediately turned into Heavenly Venerate Fire. The divine arts that she had used to attack the front immediately turned into divine arts that were attacking Heavenly Venerate Fire. Heavenly Venerate Fire's huge palm opened up layers after layers of void, melting it. Flames burned fiercely, but it wasn't so easy to attack Qin Mu and the rest in a short period of time. And the Abhijna of Lang here comes to his chest in a flash and burrows into his body. This kind of supernatural power is the divine sense. The divine sense is shapeless and incorporeal. In addition to this, God King is attacking the front. The figure blocks the supernatural power. Therefore the fire Heavenly Venerate did not have time to block. The divine sense supernatural power had already rushed into his body. Seeing the Abhijna from the front was completely different from seeing the Abhijna from the back. If the godly King Longzong were to use his divine sense Abhijna from the front, all the Abhijna would be grasped by the fire Heavenly Lord in an instant. Destroying Lang Bao's divine art wasn't difficult for Heavenly Venerate Fire. However, Lang Bao's divine art had been released in the right direction with his back facing him, so by the time he reacted, the divine art had already reached his chest. Divine consciousness burst forth from Heavenly Venerate Fire, and Lang Bao visualized the four emperors of the four extreme heavens. The green dragon, white tiger, vermilion bird, and black tortoise rapidly formed from Heavenly Venerate Fire's body. Dragon roars, tiger roars, vermilion bird cries, and black tortoise soaring snake began to destroy his body. Without Qin Mu's divine treasure territory, Lang Bao would have found it hard to do this. At most she could hide in the 35 layers of void. However, Heavenly Venerate Fire's abilities were formidable, and her magic power surged into the sky. It wouldn't be difficult to attack the 35 layers of void and kill her. With Qin Mu's help, she instantly became like a tiger with wings, and the changes of her divine arts, paths, and skills rose to a whole new level. From the moment she met Lan Yuqian, Heavenly Venerate Fire's Dao heart was deeply affected. She was stripped of her heart by Divine King Lang Bao's illusion, and her Dao heart's cultivation plummeted. Her reaction was also half a beat slower. Boom! Intense tremors came from Heavenly Venerate Fire's body. The vermilion bird visualized by godly King Lang Bao tore through Heavenly Venerate Fire's chest first. It brought out a sea of fire from his body and flapped its wings as it flew away. The vermilion bird let out a long cry as it devoured the Dao fire. It reached out with its sharp claws to grab Heavenly Venerate Fire's eyes. Heavenly Venerate Fire's back exploded as the white tiger's head reached out from his back. With a roar after his death, its sharp claws tore through Heavenly Venerate Fire's back. At the same time, Soaring Snake swam out from his mouth. With a flap of its 1,000 wings, it coiled around his neck, almost cutting off his head. The black turtle was incomparably heavy, and it swelled in his stomach, pressing down on his corporeal body. A dragon's roar rang out, and the green dragon broke open the top of his head and rose up. The creation of Divine King Lang's divine consciousness was actually so terrifying. Of course, a great credit had to be given to Eternal Peace. Tao Ancestor led Heavenly Court Tao sect to derive the great Tao of the ancient gods and the 4 emperors from the beginning to the end with macroscopic algebra, establishing the ancient divine algebra rune system. As for Eternal Peace Tao sect's Tao Master Lin Xian, Su Shanghua, and the others, they led Eternal Peace algebra experts. They used microscopic algebra to derive the ancient gods' great Tao runes once again. At this point, the great Tao rune system had become perfect. Even Tao Ancestor had to go to Eternal Peace to learn and perfect his own path, skills, and divine arts. Compared to the other creators, including Heavenly Venerate of Palace, Godly King Langer was more open-minded because she had come into contact with the cultivation system of Carefree Village early on. She had come into contact with Divine Treasures, Heavenly Palace, and divine arts, paths, and skills, and had also absorbed the results of Founding Emperor's reform. She had fused them into the Creator's divine consciousness cultivation system. The creator of the Other Shore Void cultivated the system of Divine Treasures, Heavenly Palace, and had transformed her divine consciousness into the divine arts of Great Tao of Runes. What she was more enlightened about was that she had come into contact with the results of Eternal Peace reform earlier than 10 Heavenly Venerates. As long as it was beneficial to the creators, she would incorporate everything. She learned the Great Tao and Rune system of Eternal Peace, and used it to increase the power of the divine consciousness and divine arts. In the past, the creators tried their best to portray the objects they visualized perfectly, and didn't visualize them from the perspective of Great Tao. However, with the Great Tao and Rune system of Eternal Peace, the power of their divine arts increased in a straight line. Their power would become stronger and stronger. This was especially so for an existence like Godly King Lang Bao. Her incomparably powerful divine consciousness could allow her to gather terrifying power in an instant and visualize the ancient god for emperors. I'm not his match. Godly King Lang Bao's strike succeeded and heavily injured Heavenly Venerate Fire. However, his gaze didn't land on Heavenly Venerate Fire but on the huge hand that had blasted through layers of void space and was charging toward them. He shook his head and said, "We will all die from this strike." Fire Heavenly Venerate's palm grew bigger and bigger. Under the control of his overflowing magic power, the power of his palm didn't decrease but instead increased. His magic power couldn't be compared to Heaven Master Hong, who had shattered 35 layers of void space in one strike and heavily injured the enemies there. Even though Fire Heavenly Venerate couldn't be compared to Heaven Master Hong, he wasn't too far off either. "I won't die." Qin Mu moved his feet and executed the Resurrection Divine Boat to fly across the sky. He moved horizontally in the void, and Heavenly Venerate Fire's palm came crashing down, causing the 35 layers of void to tremble violently. However, the Resurrection Divine Boat carried the 3 of them and narrowly escaped from the tip of the palm. Whoosh! The Resurrection Divine Boat rushed out of the 35 layers of void and appeared on the surface of the sky sea. In the distance, Heavenly Venerate Fire gave a muffled grunt as the flame wheel behind his head spun and crushed the vermilion bird, black tortoise, azure dragon, and white tiger. He rose into the sky and leaped into the sky. He turned into a beam of fire and escaped into the distance. Why didn't he kill us? Lan Yutian watched Heavenly Venerate Fire leave and asked in puzzlement. His Tao heart has declined. Qin Mu's gaze flickered and he said, "If he can't hit us in one strike, he no longer has confidence. Furthermore, he's injured, so he doesn't dare to let himself get injured. He's worried that if he gets injured, the other Heavenly Venerates will take the chance to take his life. I'm going back to the Other Shore Void as well. Heavenly Venerate Mu, send me off," Godly King Lang Bao said softly. Qin Mu hesitated for a moment and nodded. The 2 of them walked on the sky sea, and the surface of the sea was very calm. Only when their footsteps landed would there be ripples. Lan Yutian didn't follow them and sat down instead. He could sense that this sky sea contained a wonderful great Tao, so he planned to comprehend it quietly first. You are stopping me from meeting Celestial Master Gong, God King Lang Bao suddenly said. A wave rose unconsciously under Qin Mu's feet and surged into the distance. God King Lang Bao looked at the wave that surpassed the other ripples. He sighed softly. As expected. In the Battle of Xiandu, you had been standing between me and Celestial Master Gong time and time again, so I felt a little astonished. That's why I had this guess. What are you worried about, Celestial Master Mu? She had always called Qin Mu Sacred Baby. But ever since the Battle of Xiandu, she had changed her name to Celestial Master Mu. Sacred Baby represented the sacred baby of the creator race, while Celestial Master Mu represented Qin Mu's high and mighty identity and status. It was a form of respect. Qin Mu didn't deny it. This heavenly sea was too amazing, and even if he did, it would be revealed by the ripples in his Tao heart. I was worried that after you came into contact with Celestial Master Gong, you would be convinced by him and betray the alliance between us. Qin Mu revealed his true thoughts. The Battle of Mystic City is extremely important. If you betray the alliance between us, you will cause us to suffer heavy losses. This is something that I cannot tolerate. Therefore, I asked Founding Emperor to take action and heavily injure Celestial Master Gong, but I didn't expect that Taisu would still appear in Mystic City after healing her injuries. Therefore, when you met her, I had no choice but to stop her. God King Lang Bao looked at him sideways, and his skin was like warm sheepskin jade. He chuckled softly. When did Heavenly Venerate Mu become so unconfident? Do you think that when I come into contact with Heavenly Venerate Gong, I'll seek refuge with Heavenly Venerate Gong, seek refuge with 10 Heavenly Venerates and become one of them? Do you think that your charm is inferior to theirs? Qin Mu's face turned slightly red, and the ripples under his feet trembled like the wings of a butterfly. In my heart, Heavenly Venerate Mu, who established the path with divine arts, is something the 10 Heavenly Venerates of the Heaven Court can't compare to. Heavenly Venerate Shao is absolute beginning, the great enemy of my creator race. Consort Chong is Supreme Emperor, and she also has a deep blood feud. Heavenly Venerate Hong is already dead, and Lang Ancestor, Fire and Su are all too small. If they can't even protect themselves, what's the point of protecting me? Shi Chilua, the Yintian consort, has a deep grudge with each other, and is entangled endlessly. It's a mess, and it's hard for them to determine the victor. So how can I rely on them? As for Heavenly Venerate Gong, she smiled faintly. Celestial Master Gong's life is a life of failure. She relies on men to accomplish things, but she doesn't have much ability to do so. She first borrowed the power of Supreme Emperor, then the power of Absolute Beginning, and now she wants to borrow the power of Heavenly Master Hao. Yet she's always acting like a fly in a dog. She doesn't have much of a bearing. If you think her words can make me bow my head and hand over the future of Creator to her, you are underestimating yourself too much. You are also underestimating my gaze. Qin Mu smiled. I was wrong. Even though Divine King Langer had always been in a state of absolute rationality, getting along with her was something that was both pleasing to the eye and pleasing to the eye. No matter what they talked about, it was always something that people enjoyed. You should have let me meet Celestial Venerable Gong. Maybe if I had a talk with her, not only would she not be able to convince me, she would even be convinced by me. It might not be impossible, the girl said with a smile. Qin Mu laughed loudly. There is indeed such a possibility, but I was too worried about gains and losses. God King Lang this could hear the meaning in his words, but he didn't point it out. Now that you have solved the knot in my heart, I can be at ease. Back then, when you and I had captured Supreme Emperor's divine consciousness, we had split it into 3 parts. You, me, and Uncle June each got a share, but you haven't used your share yet, right? Qin Mu was slightly stunned. God King Lang Bao looked into his eyes. I have already reached the peak of my path of cultivation, so it's hard for me to advance any further. If Supreme Emperor's divine consciousness is useless to you, then if I help you this time, will I be able to exchange it for that treasure from you? Qin Mu shook his head. God King, you have already used Supreme Emperor's divine consciousness once, so if you use it now, it will be even more difficult for you to attain Tao in the future. The reason why Supreme Emperor can't be invincible and can't rely on his divine consciousness to refine a true Tao fruit is because he relied on the power of sacrifice to forcefully push his divine consciousness cultivation to the level of imprinting the ultimate void. I gave you Supreme Emperor's divine consciousness to harm you. God King Langbao smiled calmly. Do you think there's still room for me to improve? My cultivation and aptitude have already reached the peak. For existences like you and founding Emperor Qin Yi, there's still a path ahead, but for me there's no path ahead. Therefore, no matter what method I have to give it a try. Her eyes were as bright as the stars and the moon. Your cultivation has increased rapidly, and founding Emperor is even more astonishing, she said softly. In the past I could be on par with him, but now I'm far from being his opponent. In the future, you will catch up to me and surpass me. My use to you will become lower and lower, and I will become less and less of an existence. Qin Mu opened his mouth, but he didn't say anything. Celestial Emperor Mu, I've used 1,000,000 years to cultivate to this step, so I already know my limit. Give it to me, God King Langbao said. Qin Mu was silent for a moment, and the corners of his mouth twitched. He forced a smile and took out Supreme Emperor's divine consciousness to give it to her. God King Langbao took the jade bottle and said, As an ally I won't drag you down, so don't let down my creator race either. Qin Mu nodded solemnly. God King Langbao left. Qin Mu watched her figure disappear from the void before turning back to Lan Yutian's side. Lan Yutian was actually comprehending Tao at this moment, and Tao rhythm spread out from his body. The sky sea was peaceful and serene, and the heavenly Tao was serene. The heavenly Tao in Xiandu was already empty, but there was a heavenly Tao rising again on the sky sea. This was the abnormal phenomenon of heavenly Tao that Lan Yutian had caused. At this moment he felt the connection between heaven and man, and it was as sacred and solemn as the heavenly Duke of the past. Qin Mu came to his side, and for a moment, he felt something in his heart. He had actually unknowingly fallen into Tao. One of them sat on the surface of the sea, and the other stood on it. As they leaned forward, the sky sea and Xiandu seemed to merge into one. After an unknown amount of time, Qin Mu woke up from his path and raised his head to look at the tattered sky with his hands behind his back. He said in a low voice, The great will envelop the heaven sea and leave no grass or trees behind. It's not just playing with the scenery, it's also the heart of humanity. This heaven sea Tao heart is the heart of heaven Tao, and also the heart of humanity. His gaze was bright as he looked at Lan Yutian, who had already stood up. Qin Mu started to walk out of the heavenly sea. Let's go to 100,000 sacred mountains. Let's take a look at what's in this incense hall. The 100,000 sacred mountains were bustling with noise and excitement. When Qin Mu and Lan Yutian came there, they heard Cripple showing off to Mute and Blind, talking about how he had gone in and out of the celestial heaven 7 times without anyone noticing. It was as if he had entered an uninhabited realm. Hearing this, Blind rolled his eyes and Mute was tongue-tied. The others such as Su Shanghua, Zhang Yunjian, and the rest were filled with admiration. Qin Mu walked up to him and saw Cripple standing in front of a huge eggshell. There was still some vital fluid in the eggshell, and Cripple was extremely forthright as he divided the vital fluid in the eggshell to everyone. When he saw them coming, Cripple said in delight, Muir is back. Fatty Blue is back too. Little Fatty, did you steal the incense hall? Qin Mu hurriedly went forward, and when he saw the eggshell, his expression couldn't help changing slightly. He cried out, This is the other half of Heavenly Emperor Absolute Beginning's eggshell? Cripple was proud of himself and placed his hands on his hips. I stole it. I used my supreme speed and wasted countless treasures and a few emperor corpses to take this treasure. Qin Mu saw everyone holding pots and pans beside the eggshell. There was primordial liquid in those pots and pans, so he couldn't help stomping his feet. You guys drank it? Granny Si immediately turned her head away and wiped the corner of her mouth. Only then did she turn her head back with an indifferent expression. Seeing this, Hua Xuanxiu also secretly wiped the corner of her mouth before poking the young patriarch's waist. She whispered, Wanan, there's still egg liquid at the corner of your mouth. The young patriarch immediately wiped his mouth and asked, Is there any more? Hua Xuanxiu carefully observed it once and wiped it for him before saying, There's no more. The young patriarch was relieved. Cripple asked in astonishment, If you don't drink it, how can you keep it? There's a lot of egg liquid in this eggshell and I can even give you some. It's especially fragrant. Qin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Veins popped up on his forehead. This is Heavenly Emperor's primordial egg liquid. He was born early, so he couldn't completely refine the egg liquid. Now that he has obtained the primordial mineral vein, he has the ability to refine the primordial liquid. It's fine if you stole his eggshell, but why did you steal the egg liquid as well? If he wanted to become a Tao, he would have to take back all the primordial liquid, raw stones, and divine consciousness. Even the creators, including Heavenly Emperor and Heavenly Venerate Palace, would have to die for him to take back his divine consciousness. How much did you guys drink? Zhang Yunjian held his basin and said, "This vital fluid smells good, but it doesn't taste good when you drink it." Qin gave him a fierce glare and said angrily, "The path of absolute beginning is born from the primordial qi and divine consciousness, so it would be weird if it has a taste." Zhang Yunjian lowered his head and didn't dare to speak. After all, Qin was his foster father. He was out, so Qin had the right to teach him a lesson on behalf of his parents. Everyone looked at Qin with eager eyes. It was clear that they had all drunk primordial liquid before. Qin walked back and forth and suddenly sighed. Forget it, forget it. Heavenly Venerate Shao wants to destroy Supreme Emperor and Creator, so he will definitely face us in the future. If we drink it, we'll just drink it. At worst, we'll just kill him. Everyone cheered and Lan Yutian rushed over and called out, "Grandpa Cripple, give me a basin too." Qin immediately said, "You can't drink too much. This kind of vital fluid needs to be refined using primordial stone. Otherwise, if it accumulates in your bodies, it will definitely damage your corporeal bodies and primordial spirits. There's no benefit at all. I have experience." Wei Suifeng called out, "Junior brother, you've already gained experience, so there's no need to share it with you." Lan Yutian said in delight, "Heavenly Venerate Shao has been exiled, so we can take advantage of the emptiness of primordial mineral vein to go there and steal primordial divine stone to refine the vital fluid." Everyone cheered again. Qin immediately said, "There's Heavenly Venerate Zhao's treasure there to suppress us, so we can't act rashly." Cripple said excitedly, "If we can even go to Heavenly Emperor's harem, how can we be afraid of the primordial mine and Heavenly Venerate's treasure? Let's bring the glazed azure heaven stronghold with us." "Mute, have you been able to use the glazed azure heaven stronghold all these years?" Mute sneered, and Blind crossed his hands in front of his chest. He snorted coldly, "Of course it can be used." Qin face turned black. When they were tired of torturing him, he went forward to take a look at the primordial liquid in the eggshell. Even though there wasn't much left, it could still fill up a few water tanks. He put away the remaining primordial liquid and thought for a moment before calling Zhang Yunjian over. "Yunjian, take this primordial liquid and rush to Carefree Village immediately. Hand it over to God King Lang here, and tell her that she doesn't need to refine Supreme Emperor's divine consciousness. Refining the primordial liquid will help her raise her divine consciousness attainments." Zhang Yunjian immediately took the vital liquid and asked, "Carefree Village is currently sealed. How can I enter Carefree Village?" "Go to the origin world first and head to the Peach Forest. When you reach there, you will meet the maidservants by Heavenly Venerate Yu's side. They will bring you there." Zhang Yunjian accepted the order and immediately went. Qin took out the eggshell that he had stolen previously and compared it with the eggshell that Cripple had stolen. He couldn't help revealing a smile. "Xiao Weisu, Heavenly Emperor Absolute Beginning, Supreme Emperor Jiyu Clan. I finally have the means to deal with all of you. And I also finally have the means to save Heavenly Emperor Ling." He couldn't help laughing out loud, and his laughter grew louder and louder until it finally turned into a loud laughter that shook the mountains. "My junior brother's laughter is really like an evil devil king who is about to succeed in his plot," Wei Suifeng said to Granny Si. Granny Si instantly became alert and lectured. "Founding Patriarch, we are Heavenly Saint cult, not Heavenly Devil cult. You aren't righteous, but we aren't." Wei Suifeng remained silent. Qin put away the eggshell of absolute beginning and finally put down a worry in his heart. Lan Yutian took out incense-covered hall, and this hall appeared. Countless seals were densely packed together to seal this hall. Among them were the seals of ancient gods, demigods, and even the seals of the strong practitioners on emperor thrones. There were also the seals of the 10 heavenly venerates. Among them, the seals of the ancient gods and heavenly emperors were the most eye-catching. Among all the seals, there were nearly 2,000 types of ancient god seals, and the vast majority of them were seals that they had never seen before. In fact, Qin Mu had even found the seals of Supreme Emperor. Qin Mu's heart moved slightly. This hall of incense is even older than we imagined. It's not a building from the era of the heavenly court of Dragon Han, but from the immemorial era before Dragon Han. Lan Yutian asked curiously. Immemorial era? In that case, what did the ancient gods of the immemorial era use this hall to suppress? Cripple knocked on his head, and only the few old men of disabled elderly village dared to do so. Of course it's to suppress you, Cripple said unhappily. Your remnant soul is suppressed inside, Yenner said nervously. And my mother's soul? Su Shenghua's eyes flashed, he said. Lan Yutian was suppressed in the early years of the Dragon and Han dynasties. The soul of the vermilion bird was suppressed in the Battle of the South Pole. It's not from the immemorial era. Then what's being suppressed inside is worth thinking about. Can such a magnificent divine hall be built in the immemorial era? His question made everyone realize immediately. They all sized up the incense-wearing hall. This temple was magnificent, simple, and majestic. The architecture was beautiful, and it displayed a high level of artistic attainments. Everyone was talking about it. Shu Jun raised his hand wanting to interrupt, but he couldn't. He was so anxious that he was sweating. This temple is from Jade Capital. His spiritual sense exploded, and he suddenly shouted. The surroundings were completely silent. All eyes were focused on him. Shu Jun's messy head was extremely eye-catching. When he saw everyone's gaze on him, he heaved a sigh of relief and said in a deep voice, "This incense hall is the building of Jade Capital City." Which Jade Capital City? Everyone was puzzled. There were too many Jade Capital Cities. Eternal Peace Empire had a small Jade Capital City, and there was one in Heavenly Court as well. The heavenly palaces of other great emperors also had buildings like Jade Capital City. Ancestral Court Jade Capital City. Shu Jun paused for a moment. Back then, when I was still an ancient god king, I once went on an expedition with Supreme Emperor, Absolute Beginning, and the other god kings to a mysterious place. That place was the Ancestral Court Jade Capital City. We saw many incredible things. His expression was strange. It was clear that even now he still found it unbelievable. After a moment, he then continued, "There we suffered heavy casualties. However, our discovery was too shocking, so we sealed that place up. It must have been during that expedition that someone among us brought out the Hall of Incense." Qin Mu sized up the Hall of Incense. This hall was indeed not a treasure that the previous creators could create. In the immemorial era, creators relied on their divine consciousness to visualize their battles. Their buildings were also mostly minimalist. There were no decorations, and they didn't develop their own art. Every era had their own unique artistic heritage. The architecture and aesthetics of the Long Han era were mostly based on the worship of ancient gods, totem, and ancient gods. Strange ancient god images were everywhere. The Crimson Light era advocated the beauty of masculinity. There were majestic images of gods and demons with 3 heads and 6 arms everywhere, displaying the beauty of physical strength. In the Upper Emperor era, the Northern and Southern Upper Emperors were opposed to each other. The Northern Upper Emperor was ruled by demigods, while the Southern Upper Emperor was ruled by the human race. The Southern Upper Emperor's philosophy was that human life was greater than heaven. Therefore, art was mostly used to display the concept of man conquering heaven. In the era of Founding Emperor, divine arts became more sophisticated, and art also reached its peak. The art of this era was extremely complicated, mostly displaying the great Tao of the postnatal realm and daily life. The art of Eternal Peace era had yet to fully develop, so there were even more types. For example, deaf people were good at drawing gods, ghosts, and monsters, and also good at drawing ladies. However, the artistic style of Pixiang Palace had nothing to do with these eras. So it was indeed possible that Pixiang Palace came from the ancestral court of Jade Capital. However, this art was clearly not innate but was created by people. This was strange. Could it be that the ancestral court of Jade Capital City wasn't formed naturally, but man-made? Qin Mu's expression was strange. After he had seen the 4 great heavenly gates, 9 prison stage, God execution stage, heavenly sea jade platform and so on, he had a preconceived idea. It was that the jade capital city of the ancestral court was also a strange place formed by the great Tao of heaven and earth. However, from the incense burner hall, this jade capital city was most likely not a wonder formed by heaven and earth, but a god city created by humans. There was no civilization before the creator, so what era was jade capital city forged in? He became alert and connected it to the coffin of the previous universe under Jade Lake Jade platform, as well as the fact that the entire ancestral court was a huge sacrificial altar. He had a guess in his heart. The ancestral court, Jade capital city, is probably a product of the previous universe era. It wasn't destroyed by the destruction of the universe. However, this is only my guess. Whether it's true or not, I'll have to enter Jade capital to take a look. His gaze fell on the incense palace again. Emperor Tai, absolute beginning, and the others had explored Jade capital city and brought the incense palace away. However, they sealed the incense palace again. The oldest seal in the incense-wearing palace could be traced back to the immemorial era. In other words, after Emperor Tai Chu, and the others brought the incense-wearing palace away, they discovered something terrifying. Something terrifying was about to escape from the incense-wearing palace. Even Emperor Tai and Tai Chu felt threatened at that time. Hence, they gathered all the expert strength and sealed the incense-wearing palace together. Later on, Heavenly Emperor Absolute Beginning eradicated the Creator, sealed the ancestral court, and unified the universe. Hence, he placed Incense Hall in the celestial heavens, and became a sharp weapon to suppress those who disobeyed him. Anyone who disobeyed him would be executed, and his soul and primordial spirit would be stored in Incense Hall to be suppressed. Later on, when 10 heavenly venerates ruled, this custom was also continued. When Qin Mu thought of this, he saw Cripple and Lan Yuqian circling around Incense Hall, going round and round. In the past, Qin Mu had used the divine mirror to take a look at the seal of the Hall of Fragrance. They had already studied it for many years, and Mute had even imitated a few halls according to the specifications of the Hall of Fragrance. However, Cripple and Lan Yuqian still didn't have the confidence to truly face this divine hall. The seal that Mute had imitated wasn't as strong as the seal of the Hall of Fragrance. If one wanted to enter the hall, they would have to pass through all sorts of incomparably powerful seals. Furthermore, entering was one thing but coming out was another. If one had the ability to enter but not the ability to come out, that would be terrible. Don't act rashly, Qin Mu ordered and called Yenner over. Is Great Change still in the Sacred Mountain? Yenner said. He was still repairing the Sacred Mountain just now. I don't know if it's done yet. Qin Mu said solemnly. Bring Lan Yuqian to see him. You must beg him to use his willow branch. Yenner immediately flew up and transformed into a dragon sparrow that grabbed Lan Yuqian's arm and flew towards Great Change. Everyone was surrounding this divine hall, recording all kinds of seals and gathering them at Blind's place. Blind Granny Si, Su Shanghua, and the rest would list out the methods to break the seals. Wei Suifeng tried to break the seals on the outside, but he was stopped by Qin Mu. He shook his head and said, Heavenly Venerate of Fire knows that Clove Incense Hall fell into our hands, but the other heavenly venerates don't know. If we touch their seals, they will sense us. Only when we have no other choice can we try to break their seals. Wei Suifeng's gaze flickered and he asked in a low voice, What do you mean? If we head to the ancestral court, Jade capital city, and are trapped there, we can try to break the seals of the heavenly venerates. Qin Mu blinked and smiled. If the 10th heavenly venerate goes to rescue us, he must definitely have some cards up his sleeve. Wei Suifeng laughed loudly and stopped touching the seals. Qin Mu took out the divine bow and carried it on his back. Cripple was eager to give it a try. Qin Mu hesitated for a moment and stretched out his hand to grab it. The azure heaven canopy rumbled, and the 28 heavens closed up. Soon it turned into a 30 yards tall canopy. Grandpa Cripple, take this treasure for self-defense. Qin Mu passed the glazed azure heaven stronghold to him and suddenly remembered something. He immediately said, I'm lending it to you, not to you. When we leave this divine hall, you have to return it to me. Stingy. Cripple took the glazed azure heaven stronghold and sized it up. He praised. What a good treasure. I didn't steal it personally, so of course I won't take it. Don't worry, I'll return it to you. Qin Mu let out a sigh of relief. Not long after, Yen'er rushed back with Lan Yuqian. Fatty Lan begged for mercy, so he reluctantly nodded his head and only lent you a leaf. Ridiculous. Am I the kind of person who borrows things but doesn't return them? Qin Mu took the leaf. The veins on the leaf were complicated, and it was a leaf from Tai Yi's Dao tree. He felt regretful in his heart. If I borrowed that branch, it wouldn't be a problem to lose a leaf. If I only borrowed a leaf, it wouldn't be good to hide it. His spirit was greatly roused, and he looked around. This time I, Grandpa Cripple, and Lan Yuqian entered the divine hall while the rest stayed outside, he said solemnly. If we are trapped inside and can't escape, then Uncle June, you and Senior Brother Wei will bring the divine hall to the ancestral court, Jade Capital City. When we reach the city, we will try to break the seals on the outside and lure 10 heavenly venerables to come and save us. Wei Suifeng and Xu Jun nodded solemnly. Yen'er looked over with eager eyes, and Qin Mu hesitated for a moment before saying, we need to pass through the layers of seals at an extremely fast speed and enter Clove Incense Hall without alarming the seals. If we bring you along. Cripple shook his head and said, Little Fatty and I are already having a hard time bringing Muir along. If we bring you along, we won't be able to handle it. Qin Mu's face flushed red as he muttered, my speed is also very fast. Furthermore, I've cultivated Heavenly Venerate Moon's ultimate carrying void scripture, so it's easy for me to cross space. Lan Yuqian kindly reminded him, Brother, space divine arts can't pass through the seal without alarming it. You have to be extremely fast to pass through the seal without touching it at all. I naturally know. Qin Mu said resentfully, I'm the second god thief in the world after all. It's third, not second. 1. Cripple kept retreating and reminded him while shouting, Are you ready? If you're ready then, go. With a loud shout, 3 figures dashed out in an instant, their speed increasing crazily. However, they didn't go straight for Clove Incense Hall, but the center of the 100,000 Black Mountains. In an instant, the sound of explosions rang out, and the 3 of them increased their speed to the limit of their corporeal bodies. They then took a step forward and transformed into 3 light shadows. The 3 people in the light shadows seemed to ignore space, and their figures were like flowing lights. Even so, their speed was still increasing. Qin Mu's magic power was strong and his abilities were the strongest, but when it came to speed, he was still slightly slower than Cripple and Lan Yuqian. By the time the 3 of them reached the center of the 100,000 Black Mountains, their speed had already reached the limit. 3 light shadows appeared from the 100,000 Black Mountains in a jumping posture, getting closer and closer to everyone. When their speed reached the limit, a strange scene instantly appeared in everyone's eyes. Their bodies didn't seem to be made of anything. Even when they touched the mountains, it was as if they didn't encounter anything as they passed through the mountains. Xiao xiao xiao. 3 figures of light crashed into the incense hall and disappeared one after another, passing through the seals. However, those seals didn't move at all and allowed them to pass through, leaving the people outside dumbfounded. What everyone saw was different from what Qin Mu and the rest saw. They could only see them passing through, but in Qin Mu and the rest's vision, they were passing through the incomparably huge seals. The seals were incomparably gorgeous and had different structures. There were giants that could support the heavens and the earth, strange beasts that were multicolored, ancient gods of all shapes and sizes, and even the construction of extraordinary algebra runes. They were like incomparably precise machines. Apart from that, there was also the vast starry sky formed by divine consciousness, 10,000 paths great emperor formed by innate one chi. There was Heavenly Duke's heavenly Dao hand that fell down. An earth count used his unparalleled power to shake the underworld river, turning into a long whip that sealed the divine hall. There was also the sinkhole great abyss that spun crazily and devoured everything. They also encountered the seals of the 10 heavenly venerates. Hao Hua Gong Lang Zhu Hong Chong Yen, and the other heavenly venerates' great skills were all gathered together, and it was extremely dangerous. For the people outside the hall, the 3 of them could pass through the seals in an instant, but for them time was extremely long. The 3 of them ran with all their might, and in a flash they covered an unknown distance. However, after running for more than 10 days, the seals of incense-wearing hall still had no end. Qin Mu's speed was slower and he gradually fell behind. In less than 10 days, he had gradually caught up to Cripple and Lan Yuqian. Cripple and Lan Yuqian's speed was indeed above his, but their cultivations weren't too high. After running for so long, their magic power could no longer hold on. Qin Mu immediately executed his divine treasure domain to cover the two of them, using his own magic power to provide them with an endless supply. Cripple and Lan Yuqian's spirits were greatly roused, and they carried Qin Mu on their left and right, sprinting at full speed. They ran at full speed for another dozens of days, and they saw all kinds of seals flying past their eyes like flowers. Cripple and Lan Yuqian were both shocked and astonished. They felt that the magic power pouring out from Qin Mu was still endless, like a vast ocean. It was as if it could forever supply them with abundant vital qi. Even though Mu'er's speed isn't fast, this magic power is really vigorous. Cripple couldn't help praising in his heart. Suddenly, a door appeared in front of them, and an ancient and majestic bronze door appeared in their eyes. The three of them were greatly energized, and with a boom they broke through the last seal. Their bodies instantly couldn't stop. The three of them tumbled and fell into the door. On both sides, thick bronze pillars flashed past their eyes, and they even saw green lamps in a hurry. They were still sliding when Qin Mu suddenly rose into the air. He spread his arms in the air, and vast magic power spread out, freezing the three of them. The momentum finally stopped. Lan Yuqian hurriedly got up and helped Cripple up. Qin Mu slowly descended and protected the two of them. He stretched out his hand to take down the divine bow from the previous universe epoch and held it in his hand. Cripple also immediately took out the azure heaven-glazed pillar and shook it. The 28 heavens rotated and bloomed to protect them. At that moment they heard the sound of reading coming from the hall. The voice was clear and melodious. The destiny of heaven is nature, the recklessness of nature is Tao, and the cultivation of Tao is religion. Those who walk the path cannot leave for a moment. Those who walk the path can leave, but those who walk the path cannot. Qin Mu was astonished and followed the voice carefully. The three of them passed through a long corridor. The path in this incense-covered hall actually had thousands of twists and turns. It was very complicated. After walking for an unknown distance, the three of them finally came to the place where the sound of reading came from. It was like a private school classroom with many students sitting there. Lan Yuqian looked inside through the window and couldn't help being stunned. He saw another Lan Yuqian sitting on the ground, shaking his head and reciting scriptures. Qin Mu's gaze fell on a woman dressed in a bright red dress who was also reciting scriptures. She was surprisingly the vermilion bird of Southern Emperor. Other than Southern Emperor and Heavenly Venerate You, there were other strange people in this private school. There was a tall and sturdy creator, an ancient god with a strange appearance, and a person who made Cripple's body tremble. He cried out in a low voice, "The soul of Emperor Ming." Qin Mu's heart jumped and he hurriedly asked, "Which one is the soul of Emperor Ming?" Cripple stretched out his finger and lowered his voice. "It's that one. He looks refined and cultured. I saw his head at the place where Emperor Ming died in battle. He was dismembered and torn into countless pieces. On the battlefield of Emperor Ming, his limbs and head were everywhere." Qin Mu hurriedly looked over and indeed saw a soul that looked like a scholar. It was completely different from Emperor Ming, who was rumored to be 5 big, 3 thick, 3 heads, 6 arms and ferocious. In this private school, regardless of whether it was the Emperor Ancient God, or the most stunning celestial venerable of the human race, all of them were shaking their heads and reading. They were incomparably serious and indescribably strange. Qin Mu shifted his gaze to see who was teaching. He saw a private school teacher sitting on a lecture chair, shaking his head and closing his eyes as he listened to everyone reading. One hand was twirling his beard while the other was holding a teaching whip. He tapped the table gently. "This is the strong practitioner from the previous universe epoch?" Qin Mu had a strange expression. The private school teacher suddenly opened his eyes and looked out of the window. He tapped his teaching whip and chuckled. "Isn't it great to have guests coming from afar? Since the fellow Taoists outside the window are here, why don't you come in?" Cripple hesitated and said in a low voice, "There's something strange about this teacher. I'll go in first and you guys stay outside to see if there's anything fishy about him." After saying that, he pushed open the door of the private school and walked in. Qin Mu and Lan Yuqian stood outside to watch and saw that after Cripple walked into the private school, the teacher had whipped him in the palm of his hand and actually sat down to read with the people suppressed here. It was catchy. It was as if they had read it many times. The two of them felt their hair stand on end. Lan Yuqian whispered, "Brother, why is Grandpa Cripple sitting down too?" Qin Mu had never encountered such a strange situation before. He immediately opened the vertical eye in the heart of his brows and examined the private school. He saw that most of the people sitting there were souls or primordial spirits. Only Cripple had a corporeal body. On the other hand, the teacher in the private school was just an illusion and didn't really exist. Qin Mu searched carefully to find the source of this illusion. After a moment, his gaze landed on a painting on the back of the private school teacher. In that painting there was an old tree with its roots coiled up. It was ancient, and its crown supported the blue sky. There were flowers and fruits on the tree. There was a person sitting on a stone under the tree with a book in his hand. Qin Mu's gaze flickered, and he muttered to himself for a moment before handing the divine bow to Lan Yuqian. His divine consciousness rippled. "I'll go in for a while, you stay outside. If I fall in, don't go in. Use this bow to shoot at the Dao fruit on that tree." Lan Yuqian acknowledged. Qin Mu pushed open the door and walked in. The private school teacher raised his hand, and the teaching whip struck at Qin Mu's palm. Qin Mu laughed loudly and his voice was like thunder. "I, the majestic heavenly venerate Mu, have been famous all my life. I've roamed the ancient and modern world for 1,000,000 years, so how could I fall for your move?" "Pa!" Qin Mu's palm took a hit. He didn't even see clearly how the teaching whip had come over and landed in his palm. It was as if he had unconsciously stretched out his palm and taken the initiative to take a hit. When the teaching whip landed in his palm, Qin Mu instantly became muddled and severed his 7 senses. His Dao heart sank and he became muddle-headed. When he woke up again, he was already sitting on a futon next to Cripple. He was shaking his head and reciting scriptures together with Cripple. "My Dao heart has been suppressed?" Cold sweat broke out on Qin Mu's forehead. His Dao heart was extremely strong and his Dao realm was extremely deep. He had already cultivated to the 27th heavens of divine arts and Dao realm, so how could he be suppressed in an instant? Even if Founding Emperor made a move, he wouldn't have the ability to do so, right? It's Dao fruit. Qin Mu tried his best to raise his head, but his mouth was still reciting scriptures. His gaze looked at the picture on the back of the private school teacher. The tree in that picture is the Dao tree, the flowers on the tree are the Dao flowers, and the fruit is the Dao fruit. This private school teacher is the projection of the Dao tree and Dao fruit in the picture. The recitation from his mouth was loud and clear. The one in the middle is the greatest foundation of the world. The one in the middle is the one in the middle, and the one in the middle is the one in the path of the world. The one in the middle is the one in the position of the world, and all living things are nurtured. At that moment, Qin Mu saw the figures under the tree in the picture gradually becoming clearer. It was as if the people in the picture could walk out of the picture bit by bit as they recited. Qin Mu's heart trembled. The private school was filled with souls and primordial spirits, so they didn't have corporeal bodies, so they weren't strong. Even after going through so much chanting, the person in the painting still couldn't walk out. On the other hand, Qin Mu and Cripple were living people. Cripple's cultivation wasn't high, but Qin Mu's cultivation and magic power were equivalent to 3 to 5 emperors on Emperor Throne's realm. His cultivation and abilities were even above the souls of the Vermilion Bird and Emperor Ming. In this private school, his abilities alone were several times greater than the sum of the others. Qin Mu's arrival made the person in the painting leave the painting at an even faster speed. Cold sweat broke out on Qin Mu's forehead as he tried to execute Overlord Body 3 elixir technique. However, his Dao heart was scattered and suppressed to the point that he couldn't condense it. When he executed the technique, his vital qi also found it difficult to circulate and was extremely messy. He tried his best to condense his Dao heart and slowly raised his palm. There was a leaf in his hand and it was the leaf on Great Change Dao tree. It was incomparably difficult for him to raise his palm. Every time he moved forward he seemed to be under immense pressure. Finally, the leaf came to the heart of his brows. The private tutor stood up and came to his side. He raised his teaching whip and whipped his head as he said angrily, "You don't need to pay attention to lectures in class, you're looking for a beating." Qin Mu was hit by this strike, and the Dao tree leaves in his hand instantly fell to the ground. The Dao heart that had just formed a thread scattered once more. At that moment, a loud bang was heard, and an arrow light shot over from outside the private school, hitting the painting with a thud. The corners of Qin Mu's eyes twitched. Lan Yutian, you missed. Lan Yutian's arrow didn't hit the Dao fruit on the old tree, but only nailed it to the trunk. The power of this arrow was extremely strong. Even though it couldn't kill a strong practitioner on the emperor's throne, it was no small matter. However, when the arrow shot into the painting, the power of the arrow seemed to be very small and didn't cause much trouble. The corners of Qin Mu's eyes twitched again. There's not only the Dao tree in the painting, there's also a fragment of great overarching heaven. It's a strong practitioner from the previous universe era who refined the fragment of great overarching heaven into a painting in an attempt to sneak in. He couldn't help being worried for Lan Yutian, but at that moment 2 more arrow lights whizzed past the private school. Lan Yutian clearly hadn't learned how to bow and shoot before, so the first arrow missed. However, the second arrow and the third arrow hit the Dao fruit on the tree with incomparable accuracy. His talent was simply too high. The first arrow had allowed him to grasp the skill of using the bow and arrow, and the next 2 arrows had snatched the heart of the red. The power of these 2 arrows was extremely great. 2 arrows consecutively shot down the Dao fruit from the tree. The private school teacher turned around and saw the Dao fruit fall. His expression could not help but change slightly. Then, his figure scattered with a pop and disappeared. At the same time, the scholar under the tree also revealed a surprised expression. He raised his head and looked up at the tree. "Brother, I shot down the Dao fruit." Lan Yutian carried the divine bow and walked into the private school with a smile. The power of this divine bow is indeed powerful. "Don't come in." Qin Mu suddenly shouted loudly and bent down to pick up the leaves. His voice rolled like thunder. "There's more than 1 Dao fruit on that tree." Lan Yutian's smile froze on his face and his gaze landed on the painting from the corner of his eyes. He saw the ancient tree in the painting rotating at a neither fast nor slow speed. The back of the tree turned to the front and there was another Dao fruit hanging on the tree. When this Dao fruit rotated to the front, the private school teacher suddenly appeared in front of Lan Yutian and shouted with a solemn face, "Disturbing the class, stretch out your hand." Lan Yutian smiled. "I'm not your student. Pa." His palm took a hit, and he walked to an empty futon and sat down in a daze. At this moment, Qin Mu had already picked up a leaf and stuck it on the heart of his brows. Instantly, his Dao heart made a comeback, and at the same time, the Dao fruit that had been shot down from the tree swayed and flew up. It was about to hang on the Dao tree again. Qin Mu stretched out his hand to grab behind Cripple and grabbed the glazed green sky canopy. With a thud, it stopped in the middle of the classroom. He exerted strength with both his hands and spun it fiercely while shouting sternly, "Open, Wang." The canopy of the glazed green sky canopy spun with a whistle, and the 28 heavens bloomed with a wang. In an instant, everyone in the private school was enveloped and the sun, moon, and stars appeared in the 28 heavens. The power of countless precious treasures that had been forged by blind and mute exploded with a boom, shattering the entire private school into dust. Qin Mu roared furiously and pulled out the azure heaven barrier along with the 28 heavens. Using the azure heaven barrier as a hammer, he swept it toward the only wall that wasn't broken. This strike was majestic and majestic. Ever since the glazed azure heaven stronghold had been re-refined, this was the first time this once #1 treasure of the world had been thrown into battle. When its power erupted, it was earth-shattering. Qin Mu's muscles swelled up and jumped around wildly. His magic power and vital qi surged into the 28 heavens and activated all the treasures. The power of the azure heaven glazed building wasn't any weaker than that of a treasure of heavenly venerate. It surpassed the few arrows that Lan Yutian had shot just now by an unknown number. Boom! The azure heaven glazed building swept across the wall and blew it apart. Even the private school teacher was blasted into the painting. The painting lost its attachment and floated in the air. It suddenly expanded rapidly and fragments of great overarching heaven flew out. The Dao tree in front of Qin Mu instantly became incomparably majestic. This strike swept onto the tree but actually didn't injure it in the slightest. Under the ancient tree, the scholar raised his head to look at him. The scholar got up and walked over. His figure was very weak and didn't seem real, as if he didn't have a real corporeal body. Qin Mu was astonished and hurriedly retreated. The green heaven in his hand rotated and the 28 heavens pulled everyone into the heavens, trying to escape from this place. The scholar came to the edge of the fragment of great overarching heaven, and couldn't step out anymore. Just as Qin Mu let out a sigh of relief, the Dao fruit on the ancient tree split open and a private school teacher fell down from the Dao fruit. His head was on top of his feet, and by the time he managed to escape from the Dao fruit, he was already on top of his head. Another Dao fruit split open, and another private school teacher walked out. On the Dao tree the Dao flowers bloomed, and there was also a private school teacher inside. The 3 private school teachers walked out of Great Luo Heaven's fragment and entered the azure heaven-colored glass. Qin Mu brought the azure heaven-colored glass and retreated quickly. He shouted out in a deep voice, "Everyone, why aren't you awake at this critical moment?" His voice rumbled and reverberated through the 28 heavens of Azure Heaven Stronghold. The souls of the ancient gods, creators, Vermilion Bird of South Emperor, Emperor Ming, and the rest that he had brought into the 28 heavens woke up one by one. They looked around in astonishment. Cripple and Lan Yutian also woke up and saw the 3 private scholars slaughtering their way into the heavens and charging toward them. "Brother Mu." Southern Emperor Vermilion Bird saw Qin Mu and called out in astonishment, "Mu Qing." Heavenly Venerate Royal also saw Qin Mu and cried out in astonishment. Emperor Ming was only left with his primordial spirit and no flesh and blood, so he shouted out loudly, "This place is incomparably strange, everyone follow me and fight." He was indeed the Emperor of Crimson Light Era. He took the lead and rushed forward to meet a private school teacher. Even though he was only left with his primordial spirit, his abilities were no trifling matter. He used his primordial spirit as his corporeal body, opening and closing wide. It was like a close combat situation. The Vermilion Bird of South Emperor let out a cry and transformed into a vermilion bird to meet another private school teacher. He used all of his killing moves. On the other side, Cripple and Lan Yutian sprinted. The other ancient gods also surrounded the 3rd private school teacher and started to fight. Cripple and Lan Yutian secretly shot arrows from the side. Qin Mu mobilized the power of the treasures in green sky block. After being refined by blind and mute, their power was unrivaled. They continuously bombarded the 3 private school teachers. The 28 heavens were in chaos, and people kept getting hit by the teaching whips. After they were hit, they became muddle-headed and stopped fighting. Instead, they chanted scriptures loudly. The teaching whips of the 3 private school teachers seemed to be able to break through all divine arts, paths, and skills. Each whip could hit a person, making it impossible for them to dodge. Once they were hit, their Dao hearts would be broken, and they would listen to their orders. In the blink of an eye, many ancient gods and creators were hit. Only Emperor Ming, Southern Emperor, and Lan Yutian were able to hold on. As for Cripple, he was suddenly hit on the head by the teaching whips while he was running, and he was also hit by the chanting. Suddenly, Emperor Ming shouted and was knocked to the ground by the teaching whips. Then Southern Emperor was knocked down, and Lan Yutian used a Dao-level skill. When he finished using the skill and wanted to use it again, he was whipped. When he woke up, he saw Emperor Ming, Cripple, and the rest gathered together. The private school had appeared out of nowhere, and they were sitting in the private school to study again. Strange! Lan Yutian cried out in his heart and looked at his other self. He saw Celestial Master Yu also sitting there reading, and he instantly gave up hope. My other self has been suppressed here for 1,000,000 years and still can't escape. Looks like I won't be able to escape either. Qin Mu sprinted in the sky, and with a thought, the god Bao flew over. He turned around and shot the 3 private school teachers. The 3 of them chased after him and attacked him from 3 different directions. Qin Mu couldn't run in time and immediately activated his spirit embryo divine treasure domain. No matter which direction the 3 private school teachers came from, they would attack him from the front. The 3 teaching whips flew up and down. Qin Mu tossed the divine bow in his hand, and his primordial spirit rose behind him. He grabbed the divine bow and shot it, while he held onto the azure heaven barrier with both hands and fought with the 3 private school teachers. The 3 private school teachers flew up and down and attacked repeatedly. Suddenly, Qin Mu couldn't defend in time and was struck on his forehead by the whip. Qin Mu shook his head and sent the private school teacher flying with one strike. With a bang, the private school teacher exploded. Papa, 2 more whips landed on his head. Qinmu raised the azure heaven pillar and swept it across, sending the other two private school teachers flying. They were torn apart in the air. Qinmu let out a sigh of relief and stood on the azure heaven pillar. He saw a few more private school teachers walking down from the fragments of great overarching heaven, and couldn't help feeling a chill in his heart. However, the three private school teachers didn't make a move against him again. One of them flicked his sleeves and said, "You have the leaves of the Tao tree of an expert and can't do anything to you. Forget it, just leave." Qinmu touched the willow leaf in the heart of his brows and let out a sigh of relief. Fortunately, before this trip, I had let Yenner bring Lan Yuqian to shamelessly ask Tai Yi for a leave. Otherwise, even I would have fallen here. The abilities of these private school teachers were incomparably strange. When Qinmu unleashed his spirit embryo divine treasure domain, he was practically invincible. Unless he used a great amount of magic power to crush him, he wouldn't be able to break through his defensive circle. This kind of domain was even more perfect than Emperor Ming's 3 heads and 6 arms, but it was easily broken by these private school teachers. Fortunately, the teaching whip didn't have much power, or else Qinmu's head would have been shattered long ago. The private school that he had broken was restored to its original state, and the sound of Lang Lang reading could be heard from inside. Qinmu let out a turbid breath and walked back to the private school while leaning on the azure sky canopy. "Tao brother, you are an existence that has become Tao, so why are you making things difficult for us mortals? Could it be that the existences in the previous universe era were all bullies? If you can see that I've become Tao, then I'm not a stupid person like them." One of the private school teachers turned his head over. "I'm the primordial saint of Miluo Palace," he said. "I want to borrow their chanting to help me escape. I will not hide it from you. I am not from the previous universe era. I have lived for 3 universe eras and have attained the Tao twice. That is why I have cultivated 2 Tao fruits." Another private tutor said, "I have not attained the Tao in my 3rd life. I have only cultivated the Tao tree Tao flower. When the universe was destroyed and the great calamity broke out, I knew that I would not be able to protect myself. The world tree was also cut off by someone, cutting off the path to the future universe. Therefore, I had no choice but to beg the master of the Miluo Palace to hide in the Miluo Palace and get his help to tide over the great calamity." The third private school teacher said, "The universe has 4 stages of becoming and living in the bad space. Your universe is still in this stage and hasn't experienced the 2 stages of the bad space. You don't know how terrifying it was during the Great Destruction. If you can help me escape, I'll teach you the method to become a Tao. In the future, when this universe becomes a bad space, you can also escape this calamity." Qinmu stood in the clear sky canopy and smiled. "How about this, you teach me the method to become a Tao and hand them over to me. Then I won't kill you and turn around to leave. What do you think?" "Ignorant child, exaggerating." The 3 private school teachers did not mind. They said, "You were able to escape because of the Tao tree leaves given to you by an expert. But if you want to say that you can do anything to me, you are still far from it. I have a supreme magical technique, and the opportunity is right in front of you. If it were anyone else, they would have bowed their heads and learned my supreme magical technique." A private school teacher tapped his teaching whip lightly, and a picture appeared in the sky. "This is the situation when the ruler of your world met me back then and kowtowed to me. They were already like this, but you are a person who doesn't know the situation." Qinmu looked at the picture and saw that the people in the picture were Supreme Emperor Gongfu and the other creators. There were also a group of ancient gods, and the heavenly emperor of absolute beginning was among them. It was probably the situation when they were exploring Jade Capital City. However, there was no Uncle Jun, Bo Yang, Long Shao, or the others in the painting. They must have walked on a different path back then and hadn't encountered incense-wearing Hall. The scholar in the painting was still sitting under the Tao tree. Supreme Emperor and the others kowtowed to him, begging for the impartation of the supreme sacred technique. Even the ancient gods kowtowed to him, and only Heavenly Emperor Absolute Beginning stood by the side and watched coldly. A look of disdain appeared in his eyes when he looked at Supreme Emperor. The picture was vivid and lifelike. It reflected the expressions and even the psychology of everyone at that time, so it shouldn't be a lie. At that time, Supreme Emperor Gongfu and the rest had indeed kowtowed to the original saint of Miluo Palace, and begged him to teach them the supreme sacred technique. It was just that they didn't know if the original Saint of Miluo Palace had taught them. Could it be that Supreme Emperor's ability to cultivate divine consciousness, great overarching heaven, and imprint his divine consciousness in the ultimate void has something to do with the original Saint of Miluo Palace? Qin Mu's heart stirred slightly. Supreme Emperor's divine consciousness, great overarching heaven, had a huge drawback. Even though he had imprinted his divine consciousness in the ultimate void and cultivated it into a Tao tree, a Tao flower, and a Tao fruit, he still couldn't reach perfection. His attainments in Tao realm were just so, neither too high nor too low. Furthermore, his cultivation had been accumulated by the sacrificial power of other creators, and he hadn't cultivated it himself. It's most likely that when Primordial Saint of Mycroft Palace imparted his supreme technique to him, he had some wicked thoughts and intentionally left many loopholes for Supreme Emperor to cultivate further and further away. Even though he can possess great power, he's getting further and further away from attaining Tao. Qin Mu guessed the crux of the matter, and his gaze flickered. He smiled and asked, "Then why did they seal you?" Another private school teacher said, "It's a long story. Go in and listen, I'll tell you." Qin Mu laughed loudly. He shot out an arrow from his bow. "I know, even if you don't tell me. They were struck by your move and turned into tools for you to use to help you escape. Your supreme technique most likely borrowed faith or sacrifice to become the Tao. Supreme Emperor's cultivation was ruined because he believed in you." The three private school teachers flew up and their teaching whips struck the arrow one after another. However, the power of the arrow light shot out by Qin Mu was unrivaled. When the three teaching whips landed on the arrow, they couldn't block the arrow light at all. Tut! The arrow shot into the fragments of great overarching heaven and shot down the Tao flowers on the Tao tree. One of the private school teachers disappeared with a bang. Qin Mu shot out two more arrows and the two arrow lights shot down two Tao fruits. The other two private school teachers also disappeared one after another. The private school was completely silent, and Lan Yuqian, cripple, and the rest regained their senses once more. Qin Mu executed the Azure Heaven Barrier and smashed the private school into smithereens with a single strike. He killed his way in and planned to bring everyone away. The one who saved them was most likely Absolute Beginning. Only he wasn't fooled by you. That's why they sealed you here, making it impossible for you to escape. The flower Tao fruit flew up once more and hung on the tree. The three private school teachers appeared once again with an imposing manner and shouted loudly, "You don't know what's good for you, I won't let you off today." The three teaching whips flew up and down, and there was practically no one who could withstand a single strike. They knocked Lan Yuqian and the rest once, and everyone became obedient again. Qin Mu saved a few people, but they were also struck down by the private school teachers' whips. The few of them then went back to reciting scriptures. Three private school teachers and three teaching whips hit Qin Mu's head, but the heart of his brows was protected by the Tao tree leaves of great change, so they couldn't do anything to him. Only a few bumps appeared on his head. The three private school teachers changed their strategy and used their teaching whips to pick up the willow leaves on the heart of his brows. Qin Mu pressed down on the heart of his brows with one hand and raised the green heaven screen with the other. Suddenly, the fragments of great overarching heaven expanded and attacked him. The scholar under the tree got up and prepared to kill him personally. Qin Mu was helpless and could only retreat. The private school returned to its original state and the scholar returned to the tree. He was still holding the book and looking at Qin Mu from time to time. The shard of great overarching heaven also transformed into a painting and hung on the wall of the private school. After a moment, Qin Mu shot the Tao fruit Tao flower again. The three teachers were furious and the Tao fruit Tao flower fell from the tree. They disappeared one after another. When Qin Mu came in to rescue everyone, the Tao fruit Tao flower returned to the tree. The three private school teachers rushed over in anger, and another round of chaos ensued. Lan Yuqian, cripple, Ming Huang, and the rest were once again suppressed, and they began to chant scriptures obediently. Qin Mu escaped once more and stopped outside the private school to adjust his aura. He then bent his bow and shot again. Brat! The scholar under the tree couldn't help getting angry. He stood up and turned the book into a scroll. He pointed at Qin Mu and said angrily, "Are you done yet? If I wasn't trapped here, a leaf would have killed you." On the Tao tree, the Tao flower and Tao fruit split apart crazily. One by one, the private school teachers walked down from the Dao flower and Dao fruit, killing their way out of the private school and pouncing at Qin Mu. Outside the private school, Qin Mu wasn't afraid of them in the slightest. Wang. The spirit embryo divine treasure domain was activated. Qin Mu used the green heaven barrier as a hammer and swept through thousands of soldiers and horses, sending the private school teachers flying. The power of the green heaven barrier burst forth and crushed the private school teachers into pieces. The power of the green heaven barrier was extremely powerful. Not to mention these private school teachers, even the incense hall was shaken non-stop and the buildings in the hall were crushed into dust. The strange thing was that this hall was destroyed and gathered together. No matter how astonishing his destructive power was, the hall quickly returned to its original state. The private school teachers continued to rush over, and the teaching whips flew up and down. Every strike was so exquisite that they hit his head without any hindrance. Qin Mu was beaten until his head was dizzy. He went all out and didn't try to block the teaching whips. He only focused on executing the power of Green Heaven Stronghold to kill the private school teachers one by one. More and more private school teachers poured out from the Dao fruits like a tide. Many of them broke through Qin Mu's defense and rushed in front of him to grab the willow leaf in the heart of his brows. Just as they were about to pluck the willow leaf, Qin Mu's primordial spirit rose from behind him and covered his forehead with his huge hand. The private school teachers were furious and their teaching whips flew up, hitting Qin Mu and his primordial spirit until their heads were full of bumps. Outside the hall, Granny C, blind, mute, and the rest were staring at the hall nervously. They could only see the hall shaking non-stop as if there were huge devils fighting and killing inside. Everyone outside couldn't help being astonished. After shaking like this for 6 to 7 days, the commotion in the hall finally calmed down. There are still things in this world that Cult Master Qin can't dismantle. Su Shanghua couldn't help sighing. In the hall, under the Dao tree, the scholar's figure became dimmer and dimmer. He had used up an unknown amount of energy during these 6 to 7 days, but he still couldn't kill Qin Mu, which gave him a headache. He could only recall those private school teachers. He stopped attacking Qin Mu. Qin Mu came to harass him again and shot the Dao fruit. The scholar was also afraid of him. A private school teacher said, "You are shameless and pestering me. You aren't particular at all. If I don't fight with you, who are you going to save? I'll give them to you, but the others have to stay." Qin Mu let out a sigh of relief. The battles over the past few days had also made him unable to bear it. If he continued to fight, he would probably be so tired that he would vomit blood. "I want these people." His gaze flickered as he tapped Lan Yuqian. "Heavenly venerate you, cripple, Southern Emperor and Emperor Ming." When the scholar saw him tap Southern Emperor and Emperor Ming, he was a little hesitant. Southern Emperor and Ming Emperor were the strongest two in the private school, and they were of great benefit to him getting out as soon as possible. When Qin Mu saw his hesitation, he bent his bow and was about to shoot again. A private school teacher immediately said, "You can have them. However, you have to swear that you can't enter the hall to harass me again." Qin Mu nodded and smiled. "This incense-wearing hall isn't a good place, and the others have nothing to do with me. I can't wait to leave this place, so why would I bother to harass you? You have to swear to bring these people and leave immediately. You can't take an inch and take a mile." The scholar in the painting stood up and muttered to himself for a moment. He then broke off a branch from the Dao tree and cut it into a pointer the thickness of a finger, sending it out of the painting. A teacher from a private school held the pointer whip with both hands and sent it out. He held the pointer whip with both hands. This pointer whip is refined from the branches of the Dao tree, and contains the spirit of my great Dao. Swear to the pointer whip and bring these people away immediately. This teaching whip will adhere to you and follow you no matter where you go. However, if you violate the oath, the teaching whip will whip you down. Qin Mu hesitated and didn't take it. Instead, he examined the teaching whip carefully. The teaching whip was straight, but it also appeared soft. The markings on the bark were extremely strange, like the markings of the great Tao. It couldn't be described with the profoundness of the great Tao of a universe. Compared to the other teaching whips, this teaching whip was much more exquisite. The markings on the bark would burst forth from time to time and revolve around the teaching whip, giving off pleasant Tao sounds. Clearly, the teacher's teaching whip wasn't refined by the branches on the Tao tree. Its power and mysteriousness were inferior to this teaching whip. Qin Mu took a glance at the scholar under the tree. He said suspiciously, "You broke one of the branches on the Dao tree and made me swear on it. You also said that this branch would follow me. If I didn't break my promise, wouldn't that mean that this teaching whip would be mine?" The scholar sat under the tree and didn't say anything. The teacher in front of Qin Mu said, "If you don't break your promise, there's no harm in giving this teaching whip to you. My path is something you can't guess. This teaching whip of mine is good at beating primordial spirits and Dao hearts. No matter who it is, as long as the teaching whip is raised, it will hit the primordial spirit. If the primordial spirit is hit, the Dao heart will be ignorant." Qin Mu was skeptical. The scholar under the tree raised his eyebrows. He sneered, "You are more suspicious than anyone, so it can be seen that you are a person without fate. If you continue to be suspicious, then our deal will be cancelled. You can continue to shoot at me. I want to see you shoot for tens of thousands of years before you can shoot me to death." Qin Mu immediately smiled. "I'll swear it." After he said that, he grabbed the teaching whip with one hand. The private tutor wasn't willing to let go and immediately said, "The teaching whip is in my hands, swear it to the teaching whip in my hands." Qin Mu forcefully snatched it over and smiled. "It's better to swear on it in my hands. It's not that I don't trust Primordial Saint. Yes, I just don't trust Primordial Saint." He snatched the teaching whip and first observed it carefully. He then used his vital qi divine consciousness to inspect it one by one and uncovered half of the willow leaf in the heart of his brows. He then used the vertical eye in the heart of his brows to secretly examine it and didn't find out if there were any tricks hidden in the teaching whip. Only then did he feel at ease and stuck the willow leaf properly. The private school teacher said angrily, "Are you a thief? You are always worried that others will plot against you." "That's right, I am a thief." Qin Mu didn't deny it, and let scholar under the tree release Lan Yutian and the rest first. When everyone recovered their minds and came behind him, Qin Mu then swore to the teaching whip that after he left, he wouldn't take another half a step into the hall of cloaking incense. Once the oath was formed, Qin Mu instantly felt his consciousness being connected to the teaching whip. Not only was his consciousness connected to the teaching whip, it was even connected to the Dao tree, Dao fruit, and Dao flower in the fragment of great overarching heaven. Qin Mu's expression changed slightly, and he immediately severed his consciousness. He said coldly, "You plotted against me?" Boom! He raised the azure heaven-glazed building, and directly shattered the private school teacher in front of him. The scholar under the tree laughed out loud. "Praise my name and grant you eternal life. You guessed it right. I, Primordial Saint, have attained Dao through faith. When you swear to recite my name, you will be helping me escape. Even if you lose your mind and consciousness, as long as the oath is still there, no matter where you are, you will provide for me endlessly." Qin Mu's expression was ashen. With a wave of his sleeve, he sent everyone into his third eye, leaving only Cripple and Lan Yuqian behind. He then turned around and left. The recitation of the private school could be heard again, and it lingered in Qin Mu's mind for a long time. Cripple had a worried look on his face as he said in a low voice, "Mu, this fellow plotted against you? Is it all right?" "It's all right, we'll talk about it after we get out." The three of them came to the front of the hall. There were layers of seals on the outside, and it was even more complicated than when they had entered incense-wearing hall. Qin Mu looked at Lan Yuqian and Cripple. "I'm afraid I won't be able to help you," he said. "The primordial saint of Mycroft Palace used the opportunity of my oath to imprint the recitation of the private school into my Dao heart, making me recite it involuntarily. It won't affect me now, but the longer it takes, the greater the impact. Now, I don't have enough confidence to leave this place. Can you guys bring me with you?" Cripple carried Qin Mu on his back and said solemnly, "Don't worry, even if I die from exhaustion, I can still send you out." The two of them retreated and suddenly increased their speed, rushing into the layers of seals. Qin Mu closed his eyes and focused his mind to resist the chanting sounds coming from his mind. He executed Spirit Embryo Divine Treasure Territory, and used his own magic power to continuously pour into the bodies of the two of them to make up for the depletion of their cultivation. As they traveled at lightning speed, Cripple raised his speed to the extreme. The skin on his legs exploded and fresh blood burned as he sprinted forward with all his might to catch up with Lan Yuqian. More than 10 days later, even with the support of Qin Mu's magic power, the strength of his corporeal body was unable to make up for it. His corporeal body was exhausted, and he could only rely on his will to persevere. Lan Yuqian slowed down and Cripple gritted his teeth as he hissed, "Don't stop, no one can run out if you stop." Lan Yuqian could only brace himself and charge forward. Another 2 days passed and Lan Yuqian rushed out of the layers of seals in the Hall of Fragrance. When he turned back to look, he didn't see Cripple or Qin Mu and his heart couldn't help sinking. Boom! A tremor sounded out, and a figure covered in blood and blazing flames rushed out of the seal. He tumbled and crashed onto a black mountain. Everyone outside the hall rushed forward in a hurry, only to see Cripple's entire body burnt black like charcoal. Qin Mu fell to the side. Everyone was about to go forward, but Qin Mu had already climbed up. His 10 fingers flew up and fixed Cripple's soul that was about to scatter. He then executed profound creation technique to heal his corporeal body and make up for the deficiency of his qi and blood. Uncle June, big senior brother. Qin Mu gritted his teeth and said coldly, "Send incense-wearing Hall to the ancestral court, Jade Capital City. Activate the seal on it and lure 10 heavenly venerables over. I want to use their hands to completely destroy this divine hall. Primordial Saint of Miluo Palace, let's see how you die." Wei Suifeng and the rest didn't know what they had encountered in Hall of Fragrance, but Qin Mu gritted his teeth. It was clear that he had suffered quite a loss. Qin Mu told them the location of Jade Capital City. While checking Cripple's injuries, he said, "You guys go first and send Hall of Fragrance into Jade Capital City. Once you've touched the seal on it, leave immediately. Don't stay. Don't worry, I've been there before. Even though I didn't enter the deepest part, I know a little about the layout inside." Xu Jun said swiftly, "With me leading the way, there shouldn't be any mistakes." Wei Suifeng kept Hall of Fragrance cloak and left with him. Qin Mu took out medicinal herbs and refined pills for Cripple to consume. Cripple's aura was weak and he carried Qin Mu through the seal of Hall of Fragrance cloak, causing his life to be injured and his origin to be injured. Only after Qin Mu's recuperation did he feel better. However, to recover to his peak condition, he still needed some time to recuperate. Qin Mu refined some pills and divided them into different categories. He handed them to Granny Si and told her when to give Cripple the medicine. Granny Si was astonished when she saw Qin Mu taking out the azure heaven-glazed building and handing it over to Yin. He then invited the souls of Southern Emperor, Bright Emperor, and the rest out from his vertical eye and handed them over to Lan Yuqian Su Shanghua to take care of. Granny Si jumped in fright and immediately pulled Qin Mu over. She said worriedly, "Moor, don't scare me. Could it be that you've suffered an incurable injury in the hall?" Qin Mu shook his head and said, "I've fallen into a trap. Granny, I need to keep going into my dreams for the next few days to use Buddhist skills to resist the invasion of the primordial saint of Miluo Palace. All of you protect me. If you see all of me chanting scriptures in my dream." He hesitated for a moment before taking out the divine bow and handing it to Granny Si. He gritted his teeth and said, "Then shoot my primordial spirit." Granny Si's expression changed drastically, and she threw the divine bow to the side. Qin Mu immediately said, "Even if my primordial spirit is shot to death, it won't die. I can even reenact my soul. At worst, I can cripple my primordial spirit and cultivate it again. If that primordial saint of Miluo Palace borrows my power and comes out of Incense Burner Hall, even 10 heavenly venerates combined wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Granny, if necessary, you must kill my primordial spirit. Don't hesitate." Granny Si's expression was complicated as she silently picked up the divine bow and passed it to Blind. Blind took the divine bow and pondered for a moment before shaking his head. "I can't do it." He wanted to pass the divine bow to Mute, but Mute shook his head as well. "I can't do it to the child I raised. Let me do it." Granny Si took back the divine bow and took a long breath. She said resolutely, "I was the one who picked Moor up back then, so it's better for me to do it myself. I'm ruthless." She panted for a few breaths, but it was clear that her heart wasn't as ruthless as she said. Qin Mu said to Lan Yuqian, "Whether or not to fuse with your own remnant soul, you need to make the decision yourself. No one else can make the decision for you. Lan Yutian hesitated and nodded his head. Yen'er had taken away the soul of the vermilion bird of the Southern Emperor. The mother and daughter had finally reunited, so they naturally had a lot to talk about. Only the soul of Emperor Ming was floating on this unfamiliar land and was slightly confused. Where is this? Didn't I die? He looked up at the sky and earth. This world was actually so unfamiliar. He didn't even know how long he had been dead, nor did he know why he had come here. Don't you leave this place. A little girl stopped him and looked up at him. Her voice was clear and melodious. This is the 100,000 sacred mountains, a place that Yudu can't reach. You are a ghost. If you leave this place, the earth count will take you to Yudu. You were imprisoned in the Temple of Incense. You must have done many bad things when you were alive, right? The earth count will whip your ass. The Ming Emperor didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He stopped and asked, Who are you? Why are you blocking me? My name is Hua Xuanxiu, and this is Wen Yuan, my senior brother. The girl pulled over a delicate and handsome youth. She smiled and said, He is the young cult master of our heavenly saint cult. After a few years of assessment, he will be able to inherit the position of cult master. Of course, the old cult master is still alive. Our heavenly saint cult's rule is that the young cult master had better kill the old cult master before he can officially inherit the position. I'm afraid that Wen Yuan won't have the chance. Our old cult master is strong and strong. Patriarch Wen Yuan said helplessly. That's a bad habit passed down from the past cult masters who misunderstood Patriarch Wei's teachings. Now that Patriarch Wei has returned, there's no such rule anymore. Ming Huang, you don't have a physical body now. You're in a ghost state. It's best for you to stay here. When the cult master wakes up and finds the pieces of your previous physical body, he can rebuild your physical body and bring you back to life. Seeing how cute the two of them were, the Ming Emperor could not help but feel a sense of closeness in his heart. He said, Right now I am just a lonely soul with no possessions. Why don't I teach you and your sister my ultimate art as compensation? Hua Xuanxiu and Wen Yuan looked at each other and raised their heads in unison. Is it the leakless fate mystic art? The Ming Emperor was stunned for a moment before he nodded. He was puzzled. Even a child knows about my leakless fate mystic art? What era is it now? Could it be that even my secret of not passing it on has become cabbage? We have all practiced it. Patriarch Wen Yuan thought for a moment. He said, That's right. When the cult master mentioned you in the past, he said that the reason why you were killed was because your leakless fate mystic art could not reach the primordial spirit. It could not allow the primordial spirit to transform into 3 heads and 6 arms along with the body. It just so happens that you can't leave now. We will impart the 3 primordial spirits of the Red Emperor to you. Ming Emperor opened his eyes wide and his mind went muddle-headed. For some reason, he nodded and suddenly came to a realization. He asked, Little Dao friends, what era is it now? Eternal peace. Hua Xuanxiu and Ancestral Master Wen Yuan said in unison. Lan Yutian looked at his other self. It was Heavenly Venerate Royal. At this moment, Heavenly Venerate Royal was a remnant soul that carried his memories from 1,000,000 years ago. Whether it would be compatible with his remnant soul and become Heavenly Venerate Royal made him hesitate. Celestial Master Royal was also looking at him. The 2 teenagers looked almost identical. Of course, Lan Yutian was a little fatter. With Yen'er around, it would be difficult for him to lose weight. His face still had a childish look, while Celestial Master Royal appeared to be much more mature. However, his body was illusory and did not have a physical body. Moreover, his soul was badly damaged. Lan Yutian looked at his previous self in confusion. Although his soul was the same and he had a consciousness that was born from this body, he felt that he was not Celestial Master Royal. Celestial Emperor, you seemed to see through his confusion and smiled gently. Can you tell me about your experiences all these years? Lan Yutian hesitated for a moment before nodding his head. A man in a remnant soul sat on the side of a cliff while Lan Yutian slowly told him about his experiences all these years. From the moment he revived and lost all his memories to when Celestial Emperor you brought him back to Yudu, then sent him out of Yudu and entrusted him to Qin Mu, then to when Qin Mu brought him to tour all the academies and palaces to learn all kinds of basic runes, then to when Qin Mu had entrusted him to the elders of disabled elderly village to learn from them, to when eternal peace calamity had erupted, to when he had returned to Yudu, to when Cripple had stolen him out of Yudu after the calamity. Only then did he realize that the experiences he had encountered over the years were actually so colorful and different from the rest. He talked about how he had walked around to comprehend the path, and had taken in many disciples and made many friends. He couldn't help revealing a smile as he stammered to explain all kinds of strange divine arts and thoughts to his remnant soul. He also talked about his many disciples and the things that happened between him and his friends. For example, Big Head's Uncle June was captured by the pharmacist and was immersed in the medicinal vat with him to do research. He was like an expressionless Su Shanghua, but there was a burning heart in his chest. He was like the mature Taoist master Lin Xian who was cunning, the stubborn immortal King Muron of Little Jade Capital, the southern emperor Princess Yenner who always liked to serve others, the founding emperor Qin Yi who was obsessed with the way of the sword, and Qin Fengqing who only had food in his mind, Qin Fengqing, who only knew how to eat. He had met so many interesting people that he could not help but laugh out loud as he talked. He did not know why he had so many things to say. Although Heavenly Lord Royal was his remnant soul, he gave him the feeling that he was his close brother. Heavenly Lord Royal listened with a smile. Lan Yuqian talked until the sun set, but he did not finish his story. He continued talking until the sun was about to rise. The white from the east. Heavenly Venerate Royal asked, "Didn't you encounter any danger?" "Brother carried it for me." Lan Yuqian turned his head back to look at Qin Mu who was dreaming. He carried it all, no matter how great the danger was, he carried it all. He wanted me to focus on comprehending the path, and didn't want those disputes to interfere with me. He didn't want me to get involved in those disputes. I know what he wants. Do you know? Royal Heavenly Venerate propped his hands on the ground and leaned back. He looked at the white sky and turned his head to look at himself beside him. He smiled and said, "My experience is different from yours. Before the Long Han era, the human race had too many hardships. It was difficult to survive. I once hoped that all the sufferings of the human race would be shouldered by someone, a hero. Later I realized that no one would be the hero. So I stood up. No one would be the hero, so I will be the hero." His eyes were full of spirituality. Although it had been a period of suffering, he said it with great ease. He said softly, "I have to rack my brains. I have to increase my strength while thinking about how to make the human race stronger, and how to find a way to survive in the thousands of dead ends. I always feel tired, physically and mentally. For this ideal, I have to give up my path of seeking the Tao and wait for more human experts to rise." He stood up and faced the rising sun. He opened his arms. "You are luckier than me. In this era there are more people who stand up. They are heroes and heroes. They carry the heavy burden for you and carry the burden for you. The seeker of the Tao Lan Yuqian, you are the real Lan Yuqian." His body slowly became transparent, and his memories flew like smoke. He turned around and looked at Lan Yuqian with a pure smile on his face. "I'm not the real Lan Yuqian. I'm just the Lan Yuqian who was suppressed and changed by the era. Heavenly Lord Royal, in the end, is just a memory of Lan Yuqian." He waved at Lan Yuqian to bid farewell to himself in this era. Lan Yuqian hurriedly got up, only to see Heavenly Lord Royal disappear at a rapid speed, leaving behind only an honest and gentle voice. "This memory will delay you and make you become the past me. Let the memories of the past disappear along with history." Lan Yuqian reached out to grab him, but he did not catch him. He only caught a few remnants of his soul. The wisps of remnant soul sensed his soul and entered his body to fuse with him. Lan Yuqian looked at the rising sun and tears flowed down his face unconsciously. He felt like he had lost something but also felt like he had obtained something. He walked towards the sun and the sunlight gradually became dazzling. He raised his hand to block the sunlight and saw Qin Mu sitting on the ground. Layers upon layers of dreams expanded outwards. It was already midnight because he couldn't bear to part with this chapter of more than 3,200 words. Maha! In Qin Mu's layers of dreams, numerous little ones gathered together. Some had solemn expressions, some had wild auras, some wore animal skin shorts, a short coat, and a beard that was as unkempt as a savage. Some were like gentle and refined scholars, some carried knives with their bare feet like pig butchers, and some had the demeanor of an expert. There were also monks in Qin Mu who ran over. They were like Buddhas who had attained the Tao, and the Buddha light around them shone brightly. The little ones in the dreams gathered together and surrounded the dreams next to Qin Mu's primordial spirit. Qin Mu's primordial spirit was vast, and his body broke through the layers of dreams. He was like Mount Meru that had traversed through countless worlds. The many little Qin Mu spoke one after another to express their opinions. He used his brain to analyze the principles of the divine arts of the primordial saint of Miluo Palace, and how he could avoid being assimilated by the primordial saint of Miluo Palace. The first few days were peaceful, but on the third day, a little guy was passionately talking about how he had broken the spells of the primordial saint. Just as he was getting excited, the language of the Mahama suddenly changed. The destiny is nature, the recklessness is Tao, and the cultivation is religion. He instantly became an anomaly among the little guys, and he was swarmed by the little Qin Mu and killed on the spot. However, not long after, another tiny Qin Mu was assimilated and became a scripture reciter. Even if he was killed, there would still be new tiny Qin Mu falling into his trap. Maha! Guji! In the dream realm, countless tiny Qin Mu was in chaos. At this moment, a Buddha Qin Mu stood up and formed an immovable seal. A loud bell rang out and resounded throughout the entire place, suppressing the chaotic little people. He stabilized their minds. Golden springs gushed out from under the feet of Buddha Qin Mu, and lotus flowers rose from the springs, lifting him up. It was sacred and solemn, and countless tiny Qin Mu looked at him. Ma! Ha! Buddha Qin Mu formed a seal and slowly sat down. He chanted Buddhist scriptures that no one else could understand, but those tiny Qin Mu who were in a panic seemed to understand. They all sat down on the ground and chanted along with Buddha Qin Mu. In Qin Mu's numerous dreams, an extremely spectacular scene instantly appeared. Tens of thousands of Qin Mu sat on the vast plains like a forest formed by monks. Each of them chanted the same type of Buddhist scriptures at the same time. Their voices became louder and louder, becoming more and more unified. The voice was like a torrent of faith that swept through all the dreams. Even though they couldn't understand it, it was exceptionally shocking. His dreamlands were like Buddhist kingdoms and Buddhist realms. Buddhist light expanded from each dreamland. It was bright and boundless, and the Buddhist voice was vast and mighty, calming one's heart and soul. When Granny C, Mute, Blind, and the others saw this scene, they could not help but heave a sigh of relief. After the past few days of recuperation, Cripple was also much better than before. Seeing this scene, they were also relieved. Granny Si put down her divine bow and said in a low voice, "The Buddhism of Great Thunderclap Monastery is a study of the heart. It's not faith but faith. The tempering of the heart might be able to deal with that primordial saint of Miluo Palace." Cripple's face was still slightly sallow as he said, "Moore has raised his faith and achieved heart like a Vajra, subduing the heart ape. There shouldn't be anyone in the world who can disturb his mind." The few of them waited quietly. On the 10th day, a discordant voice suddenly appeared in the flood of Buddha's voice in Qin Mu's dream. The corners of Granny C and the rest's eyes twitched. They saw tens of thousands of Qin Mu sitting like great Buddhas in the heavens around Qin Mu's primordial spirit, and the voice came from the lowest heavens. The middle also is the foundation of the world. The harmony also is the way of the world. This voice disturbed the Buddhist skills, so the interference wasn't strong. However, it was like a plague, gradually infecting the other small Qin Mu. Granny C and the rest's expressions became more and more solemn. They saw the second small Qin Mu being assimilated and reciting the scriptures of the primordial saint of Miluo Palace very quickly. After that, it was the third and the fourth. In the end, hundreds of small Qin Mu were assimilated, and the speed of the infection instantly increased greatly. It continued to spread to the center, and more small Qin Mu was assimilated. Layer after layer of dreams were polluted. Granny Si's expression was solemn as she picked up the divine bow that she had thrown away and held it tightly. Cripple stared at her hand, and his gaze fell on the divine bow in her hand. His expression suddenly sank. "Granny, what are you trying to do?" "None of your business," Granny Si said coldly, still staring at Qin Mu's dream. Cripple was restless. He walked around and suddenly moved to snatch the longbow in Granny C's hand. Granny Si was already on guard. She raised her other hand and a series of loud bangs could be heard. The geomagnetic origin energy in her palm burst forth, pressing down on Cripple's body one after another. It was as if one was pressing down on Cripple one after another, causing him to lie on the ground, unable to move at all. Cripple, you were heavily injured previously, so you don't know the whole story, Granny Si said angrily. She pulled back her divine bow and continued to stare at the tiny Chinmu who was being assimilated in the dreamland. However, the divine bow she pulled back only wanted Chinmu's primordial spirit in the middle of the heavens. I don't know. Cripple supported himself on the ground with all four limbs and tried his best to stand up. However, with a few loud rumbles, he was once again pressed to the ground. Cripple's eyes were bloodshot, and they turned scarlet red as he struggled with all his might. He hissed, "See, you stinky woman, I don't know why you had to shoot Moore. But I know that you were the one who picked Moore up, but you were the one who sent him away every time. Every time it's you who finds it troublesome to raise him, and every time, I'm the one who stole him back." He was unable to struggle free from the origin magnetic great divine ability, and he suddenly roared angrily, "Moore was raised by me. Change the sun with your primordial spirit." His body didn't move and his primordial spirit left his body. With a swoosh, he broke through the origin magnetic great divine ability and instantly appeared beside Granny Si. He then grabbed the divine bow. Granny Si kept the divine bow and turned around. With a sway of her dress, the origin magnetic divine light transformed into countless stars. The star energy between the stars formed many chains that shuttled up and down. They interweaved and interweaved, forming the great net of all heaven. Cripple's primordial spirit rushed into the omniscient net, but wasn't caught by it. Instead, it shuttled through the starry sky and said furiously, "If it wasn't for me, Moore would have been given to someone else by you. If you want to kill him, kill me first." His primordial spirit suddenly expanded and became incomparably majestic. Shifting the stars and changing the battle, it disrupted Granny Si's divine abilities. The ultimate skill of divine theft was displayed vividly on his body. "Cripple, don't mess around." Blind flew forward and his divine arts erupted. Instantly, they were connected to Granny Si's divine arts, and the two divine arts actually perfectly combined. Blind borrowed the stars and stars formed by Granny Si's primordial magnetic divine light, and laid down all sorts of formations to trap Cripple. His attainments in formations were the best in eternal peace. Even Yan Yunshi, the #1 person in formations of founding emperor era, admired him greatly. Cripple was furious. His primordial spirit speed was raised to the maximum as he said sternly, "I, your father, have already come here. How can I be afraid of a blind man like you?" Blind could not help but be furious. He leaped into the stars and personally took control of the array formation. He activated the divine spear Long Tua and said angrily, "The seal is dead, but the array formation is alive. Do you think you can escape from the array formation?" The two of them exchanged blows, and their bodies shuttled through the starry sky. Mute looked at Chinmu's dreamland and saw that in this short period of time, almost all of it had been contaminated. Only the last Buddha, Chinmu, had not been assimilated. The Buddha, Chinmu, chanted Buddhist scriptures and tried his best to fight against the billions of tiny Chinmu who had been assimilated. However, the Buddhist scriptures in his mouth were intermittent. "If we don't make a move now, it'll be too late." Mute sighed and looked at Granny Si. Granny Si gritted her teeth and pulled back her divine bow. She was about to shoot an arrow to kill Chinmu's primordial spirit. At that moment, Buddhist lights burst forth from the Black Mountain and the sound of Buddhist chanting could be heard. Granny Si turned her head back and saw a middle-aged Buddha walking over from the layers of Buddhist lights. Old Ma. The big Buddha walking towards them was cultivating with his hair tied behind his head. He was different from the other monks. He did not wear the robes of a monk and looked like an ordinary mortal. However, when he walked towards them, the sound of Buddha's voice was vast and mighty, and the light of Buddha surged. It turned into circles and circles of halos behind his head. In the halos, the heavens of the Buddhist world appeared one after another. There were a total of 28 heavens. In the center was Mount Dashu. The Buddhas were sacred and stood in the heavens. They chanted Buddhist sutras and flowers fell from the sky. Calming the hearts of the crippled and the blind who were fighting, they stopped fighting. This great Buddha was Old Ma of disabled elderly village, Divine Constable Ma, and Rulai Ma. He walked over with heavy Buddha light behind him, and the 28 heavens of the Buddha realm became more and more real. All kinds of Buddha treasures hung in the heavens, and the treasure light lingered around them, making them look extraordinary. Old Ma ignored everyone and came to Qin Mu's side. He raised his hand and pointed at Qin Mu's dream realm. The dreamland actually opened just like that. Old Ma walked into Qin Mu's dreamland and came to the heart of Qin Mu's brows. He sat down in the lotus position. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Tremors came one after another. The 28 heavens of the Buddha realm spun behind Old Ma's head and hung behind Qin Mu's primordial spirit. The Buddhas of the heavens chanted loudly, and the Buddha's voice lingered around, resounding through the heavens. Old Ma slowly closed his eyes, but the eye in the heart of his brows slowly opened. Rulai's third eye was the Buddha's eye, and it had always been closed. When it opened, it meant that the situation was incomparably urgent. However, when the Buddha's eye opened, a beam of Buddha light shot out and landed on Buddha Qin Mu's body. The Buddha in the dreamland instantly stopped assimilating. The vertical eye in the heart of Ma Rulai's brows shot out beams of Buddha light, freezing Qin Mu in the dreamland. He shouted out softly, "Delusion!" Qin Mu in the dreamland immediately shut his mouth. Some of them struggled to open their mouths, but the moment they opened their mouths they were lying. They were no longer the scriptures of the primordial saint of Mycroft Palace. Ma Rulai's eyes were shut tight, but the third eye in the heart of his brows kept opening, continuing to freeze the countless Qin Mu in the dreamland. I can help Moore hold on for a few days, but I won't be able to hold on for long. I have junior brother Zhang Kong, and his heart of Buddha is brilliant. He lives in Great Thunderclap Monastery, and his Buddha nature has already reached the depths of Great Brahma. Cripple, go and invite him over. Cripple's spirit was greatly roused and his primordial spirit quickly returned to his corporeal body. Suddenly, his figure flashed and Blind cried out in alarm. His clothes had been stolen clean and there weren't even any socks left. Blind hurriedly used the divine spear Long Tua to protect his lower body and said angrily, "Cripple, you hate beating people up and blame it on me." Cripple had already left and left Blind's underwear, socks, underwear, and outer clothes everywhere. Mute sent over a set of clothes and Blind hurriedly ran to a secluded place to put them on. He said angrily, "I hate beating people with sticks, damn Cripple. It was clearly Granny C who beat you first and I was only helping. If you have the ability, go steal Granny C's clothes." Before he could finish his words, a series of magnetic great divine powers fell, and Blind was instantly pressed down to the ground, unable to move. Another series of great divine abilities descended. Blind could only kick his legs. Even the divine spear Long Tua was suppressed to the point of submission. He could not stop complaining to Blind. After a few days, Cripple rushed back as fast as lightning. He held a demon ape with shiny black fur in his hands. The demon ape was as big as a mountain. It was still snoring and snoring like thunder when he lifted it up. Blind felt the pressure on his body lighten, and he let out a sigh of relief. He immediately got up. He had been suppressed for several days, so Granny Si must have calmed down when she saw Cripple carrying Devil Ape Zhang Kong over. She let him go. "Zhang Kong Rulai is still sleeping, so you brought him here?" Blind went forward and asked. Cripple carried Zhang Kong Rulai to Qin Mu's side and put down the reclining Buddha. The Devil Ape Zhang Kong Rulai's fur was even longer than before, so it was impossible to tell that he was a huge Buddha with a huge Buddha heart. Instead, he looked like a devil monster from Yudu. "He's sleeping, and there are monks and Buddhas everywhere. I tried to wake him up, but no matter how hard I tried I couldn't, so I could only steal him away," Cripple said unhappily. "The monks and Buddhas of Great Thunderclap Monastery are also stingy. They actually chased after me with weapons. Luckily I ran fast." Blind was speechless. Old Ma's voice came from Qin Mu's layers of dreams. "Even though junior brother Zhang Kong's magic power and cultivation aren't up to par, his temperament and cultivation are above mine. He's the only one who's close to old Buddha. With him around, he can last for another month." He sat in the heart of Qin Mu's primordial spirit, and his body swayed on the verge of collapse. The Buddha's eyes in the heart of his brows also dimmed down, making it difficult to stop those Qin Mu and stop them from speaking nonsense. Devil Ape Zhang Kong suddenly stood up, but his eyes were still tightly shut. His snoring was like thunder as he walked into Qin Mu's dream. When he entered Qin Mu's dream, He still snored loudly and fell to the ground to sleep. He wasn't like old Ma, who still needed to execute his Buddha Dharma to suppress him. Everyone looked at each other in dismay. They saw that Qin Mu in the dream had actually fallen asleep as well. They breathed together with him and entered the dream together, sleeping sweetly. When everyone saw this situation, they finally felt at ease. Granny Si put down her prehistoric divine bow and said in a low voice, "Now that there are 2 Buddhas here, we can hold on for another month. I wonder if Patriarch Wei, Uncle June, and the rest have already found the ancestral court, Jade Capital City, and attracted the 10 heavenly venerates." She raised her head and looked up at the sky. On the top of the 100,000 sacred mountains, looking up at the sky, they could also see Xian Capital. Most of the 10 heavenly venerates should still be in Xiandu, splitting the benefits of Xiandu, subduing the heavenly Tao, and refining the heavenly duke's body. It would take a long time to travel from Xiandu to the ancestral court. Although the heavenly court above the ancestral court had a heavenly venerate guarding it, there were not many of them. Moreover, most of the 10 heavenly venerates are injured. Can they really go to the ancestral court and find Jade Capital within a month? Granny Si said in a low voice. Even if they find Jade Capital, can they break the incense palace and kill the original saint of the Mi Luo palace? She was worried. At this moment, Wei Suifeng and Shujun were standing in the wind. Shujun's glabella suddenly opened, revealing an absolute beginning divine stone. His soul consciousness burst out, visualizing all kinds of strange scenes in the air. He said in a low voice, "I was part of the seal that sealed the ancestral court's Jade Capital City." Although everyone said that they would forget what happened in Jade Capital City, and not think about what happened there, how could they not think about it? He was one of the seals in Jade Capital City. Although he couldn't completely break the seal in Jade Capital City, he could still break the seal he had left behind. When Shu Jun broke the seal, an ancient and boundless aura suddenly shot up into the sky, causing the ancestral court to shake. Kacha kacha! A violent shaking sound was heard as a corner of an ancient divine city suddenly appeared in front of them. The aura of the vast great Tao assaulted them, causing them to lose their balance. Wei Suifeng and Shu Jun's faces were all wrinkled from the impact. When the aura of the great Tao passed by, Wei Suifeng shook off the dust on his body and looked at the magnificent buildings that suddenly appeared in front of him and the terrifying scene in the divine city. He muttered, "If I didn't want to save Junior Brother, I wouldn't have come to such a place even if I was beaten to death." Before he entered the city, he left behind a huge cauldron. The cauldron was filled with star sand, and an incense stick was inserted into the sand. Shu Jun did not understand. Wei Suifeng said, "After we enter, this incense stick will draw the geographical map of our path on the star sand. If we fall into it, the others can follow the map to save us." As expected of an old Jianghu man, Shu Jun could not help but praise. "With this move of yours, you can guarantee that we won't have any worries. However, I am also an old Jianghu man. As long as I walk the path that we have taken in the past, I will be able to escape unscathed." Wei Suifeng said, "I hope so." "What do you mean I hope so?" "Jinx great fortune." Shu Jun laughed loudly and walked into the ancestral court's Jade Capital first. Wei Suifeng followed behind him and was extremely nervous. Looking around, he saw that the ancestral court's Jade Capital City was very different from the heavenly court's Jade Capital City. The ancestral court's Jade Capital City was very dilapidated. Other than the vast aura of the great Tao that had just broken the seal, there was also a strange aura of death. It allowed him to keenly sense that under the influence of this aura, the great Tao laws that he cultivated were actually showing signs of crumbling and disintegrating. This was the aura of the great Tao withering. His great Tao laws were constantly disintegrating, and were slowly losing the power of his Tao arts and divine arts. He could also feel that his body and primordial spirit were being invaded. Originally, his lifespan was the same as that of heaven and earth. But now, he actually felt that his lifespan had come to an end. Every moment he stayed in this divine city, his lifespan was reduced by 1 day. As he went deeper into this divine city, the speed of his lifespan was still increasing. Hoo! A gust of hot wind blew over, blowing a few skulls on the ground. Shu Jun's expression changed slightly. He hurriedly pulled Wei Suifeng and walked quickly. They came to a withered tree and stood there, staring nervously at the hot wind. The hot wind blew past the skulls, and one of the skulls rolled to the bottom of the tree. The strange thing was that Wei Suifeng could not feel the hot wind under the withered tree. Wei Suifeng reached out his hand and was about to feel the wind when Xu Jun slapped his hand away. "You can't touch this wind." Xu Jun was extremely nervous. He said in a hoarse voice, "I call it the wind of heat quietness. If you touch it, your primordial spirit will be burned to ashes." Wei Suifeng's heart skipped a beat. He quickly asked, "How powerful is this wind of heat desolation?" Back then, our creator race brought many experts and ancient gods to explore this place. This is the first time we encountered this kind of wind. Other than those who managed to hide under the tree, the others all died. Xu Jun took out a sledgehammer and smashed it at the skull. That skull should be the creator's skull. When it came to the tree, it suddenly grew 4 limbs and bones. It made gurgling sounds before it was smashed into pieces by Xu Jun's sledgehammer. It was destroyed in body and soul. Xu Jun heaved a sigh of relief. He waved his hand and threw the broken bones away. He said indifferently, "There's not even the slightest bit of divine sense left. Even the great Tao of the ancient gods was destroyed." Wei Suifeng looked at the broken bones on the ground and revealed a puzzled expression. Xu Jun said, "It was affected by the tree behind us. This tree should be the Tao tree that Celestial Master Mu had mentioned before. It was also called the World Tree. The big black tree was a world tree. Although this tree is dead, its remaining power is still there. By guarding it, it can block the heat and wind. However, we absolutely cannot touch this tree. Back then, when we escaped under the tree, some people changed after they touched this tree." He had a strange expression on his face. They became another person, or more accurately, a human. They killed many of our experts. What an ominous place. Wei Suifeng shivered and tightened his collar. After the heat died down, they left the withered tree. Wei Suifeng looked around and saw that the ancestral court, Jade Capital City, was filled with dilapidated halls and collapsed buildings. Even the great Tao patterns on these palace buildings had been erased, leaving only blurry lines. There was still primal chaos chi in the ruined walls. It was extremely heavy, like a small pond. Wei Suifeng even saw that the primal chaos chi was frozen. As they passed by, a white smoke rose from a frozen primal chaos chi. It was like a head whose face could not be seen. It let out a breath of cold air at them. Xu Jun hurriedly pulled Wei Suifeng and ran away, avoiding the cold wind. He said quickly, "That is the cold wind formed by the condensation of primal chaos. If the cold wind blows on your body, everything will melt and become void." Wei Suifeng could only follow him and run for his life. After running for a short distance, Wei Suifeng's expression suddenly became dull. He saw thousands of palaces in front of him. Although they were dilapidated, he could still see the grand scene of the past. However, in front of these palaces, there stood a withered tree. One dead Tao tree after another. Hundreds of Tao trees were reflected in his eyes. Wei Suifeng swallowed a mouthful of saliva with difficulty. His throat was dry, and he was so shocked that he did not have any thoughts in his mind. Xu Jun brought him to a withered Tao tree and stopped immediately. He turned around and looked at the cold and lonely wind. Wei Suifeng stood obediently beside him. Xu Jun said, "Don't touch it." Wei Suifeng nodded obediently. Xu Jun stared nervously at the cold and lonely wind. He said without turning his eyes away, "Back then, God King Boyong was our big brother. His spiritual sense was extremely strong, yes, slightly stronger than mine. He mainly relied on Long Shao. He joined hands with Long Shao to investigate this cold and lonely wind. He told us that when this wind blew, all matter would melt and no matter would move again. The particles that made up matter would continue to split until they could no longer split. And when they split to the minimum, the distance between each particle was infinite." Wei Suifeng could no longer imagine that situation. This is the void. Even the 35th void is not as powerful as this void. Xu Jun licked his lips with his fluffy hair on his head. Boyong and Long Shao guessed that there is another void above the 35th void. It is most likely the void blown out by this cold wind. He called it the ultimate void and guessed that the cold wind in this city might be a fragment of the ultimate void, and this wind should be blown out by the ghosts who died in the ultimate void. The void had the ability to turn into void. Any living being or material that stepped into the void would be turned into void. The so-called void was when a person stepped into the void, their body would become bigger and thinner, gradually turning from the real to the virtual form. 1. The physical particles that formed the person would continue to stretch and lengthen the distance between them, until their entire person would turn into particles that were unrelated to each other and disappear into the void. This kind of situation was voidification. Qin Mu's third heaven of Tao realm had been formed in great overarching heaven. The reason he used was the reason of the void and divine consciousness. It was the divine art of Tao realm that he had comprehended from the knowledge of the creator race. Wei Suifeng looked into the distance with a dull gaze. Xu Jun stared at the cold wind and waited for it to pass. Suddenly Wei Suifeng pulled his sleeve and Xu Jun said, "Wait a little longer. This wind hasn't completely passed." Wei Suifeng tugged at his sleeve again. Xu Jun said impatiently, "I'll let you wait for a while. If we go out now, we'll run into the tail of the wind. If we're swept by it, we'll die." Wei Suifeng could not help but ask, "Xu Jun, when you came here last time, did you notice that there were still living people in the city?" "What living people? This city is a dead city. Let alone living people, we didn't even see a ghost." Xu Jun turned around. Wei Suifeng pouted and said in a trembling voice, "There seems to be a living person ahead." Xu Jun looked over and could not help but shiver. As expected, he saw a living person sitting under a tree, looking at them with a smile. Both of their faces were ashen. They saw that the person was a woman with peerless beauty. She stood up from under the tree and waved at them from afar. The two of them focused their eyes and looked again. The woman had already disappeared, and a fruit had appeared on the withered tree just now. Tao fruit. Their hearts pounded wildly. It was a Tao fruit. Although it looked wrinkled, the Tao fruit was still filled with a rich Tao rhythm. Could it be that the woman just now was the soul contained in the Tao fruit? Finally, the cold and lonely wind stopped. Wei Suifeng and Xu Jun looked at each other, and the two of them walked towards the Tao tree together. When they were not far away, the two of them stopped. They saw the Tao fruit spinning gently on the tree. Then the wrinkles on the Tao fruit became clearer and clearer, becoming more and more real. Wei Suifeng was on guard. Gradually, in their eyes, the Tao fruit was as big as a planet. Each of the lines on the Tao fruit appeared to be extremely thick, and the ones that formed these lines were the finer ones. Their structure was extremely complicated. However, the finer Tao patterns had the structure of Tao patterns within them. They looked layer by layer. The veins on the surface of the Tao fruit actually revealed endless details. The more they looked, the more details there were. The more profound, and the more difficult it was to decipher. The two of them were unconsciously immersed in it. It was as if they were immersed in a decryption game that possessed a unique charm. They could not suppress their curiosity and allowed them to continuously observe the finer details. However, what they did not notice was that from the outside, the Tao fruit did not change at all. What changed was themselves. The two of them continued to shrink, getting closer and closer to the Tao fruit. They were getting smaller and closer, and they were about to be swallowed by the Tao fruit. Suddenly, Wei Suifeng and Xu Jun saw the most subtle part of the Tao fruit. There was a beautiful woman lying in the center of the Tao fruit. She was sleeping in the Tao fruit. It was sweet and moving. "Old Wei." Xu Jun suddenly released his spiritual sense and shouted, "Don't be bewitched by this woman." Then, his spiritual sense attacked Wei Suifeng's mind and woke him up. Wei Suifeng felt lost and mumbled, "Another kind of beauty, not inferior to Zhu Wuchen's beauty." He immediately realized, why isn't Xu Jun bewitched? Is his Tao heart stronger than mine? He didn't know that Xu Jun's taste in beauty was different from ordinary people. He didn't think that this woman was any good looking at all. At this moment, the two of them finally noticed that they had come to the inner part of the Tao fruit. They turned their heads and looked back. Endless Tao patterns were entangled, sealing them within this strange Tao fruit. They stood there and couldn't see any light from the outside world. They could only see endless Tao patterns. The Tao patterns were like chains, shooting out from all directions. The power contained in those Tao patterns made even Wei Suifeng, who was at the great circle of the monarch throne, shudder. Despair filled his heart. Xu Jun also fell into despair. He shouted at the top of his voice, Celestial Master Mu, you saved my life, but I can't give it back to you. Boom! Countless Tao patterns drowned them. Xu Jun closed his eyes, thinking that he was dead. However, there was an incomparably terrifying throbbing around him, blocking the Tao patterns of the Tao fruit. Wei Suifeng is so powerful? Xu Jun was both surprised and delighted. I didn't expect him to have such ability. He had just opened his eyes when he saw the incense-wearing hall standing in front of them. Wei Suifeng had surprisingly taken out the incense-wearing hall and used it to resist the attack of the Tao patterns. The incense-wearing hall did not have any power, but the incense-wearing hall had countless layers of seals. The Tao patterns of the Tao fruit burst out and activated the power of all the seals in the incense-wearing hall. The seals in the incense-wearing hall gathered the seals of all the experts from the immemorial era until now. From the Supreme Emperor to the Absolute Beginning, from the Absolute Beginning to the 10th Heavenly Venerate, there were also the seals of countless creators, ancient gods, and emperor experts. At this moment, the power of these seals exploded in an instant. The shock and joy on Xu Jun's face had yet to bloom when Wei Suifeng suddenly pounced over. Countless teleportation runes danced around his body and wrapped around the two of them. He shouted sternly, "Hurry up and leave!" Boom! Endless rays of light exploded from the strange Tao fruit. Violent tremors burst out in all directions with the Tao fruit as the center. In an instant, a monstrous power soared into the sky from the ancestral court's jade capital. It completely shattered the seals left behind by the godly monarchs, ancient gods, and primordial emperors from the immemorial era. It caused this incomparably ancient divine city to appear in the ancestral court, completely revealing itself. And in this vast divine city, this terrifying impact seemed to have triggered a chain reaction. Waves of incomparably terrifying tremors were triggered, erupting one after another. Even the people in the 100,000 sacred mountains could see that in a desolate land in the ancestral court, waves of terrifying rays of light rushed into the sky, shaking the great Tao of heaven and earth and pushing away the white clouds in the sky. They broke through the world barrier of the ancestral court. And in the heavenly court, the gods guarding the heavenly court only felt that the earth was shaking and the mountains were shaking. The entire heavenly court was shaking non-stop. The ground of the heavenly court cracked and cracked. The halls swayed and almost collapsed. It was difficult for the gods to stand firm. At that moment they saw the terrifying Tao light shoot up into the sky. The Tao light connected with each other, and the light formed a vast tree in the sky above the ancestral court. Heavenly Venerate Void and Heavenly Venerate Fire, who had stayed behind to guard the heavenly court, immediately stood up and suppressed the turmoil in the heavenly court. The two heavenly venerates looked toward the rising light, and their faces fell. They saw countless stars being pushed away from their original trajectories by these rays of light, and the celestial phenomenon was in chaos. In Xiandu, Heavenly Venerates Hao Shi Qilua Yan Tianfei, Ancestral God King, Qing Tianfei, Divine Emperor Lang Xian, and Heavenly Venerate Palace were refining the Heavenly Tao and refining the Heavenly Duke's physical body. At this moment, the Heavenly Duke's physical body was also shaken. The billions of stars in Xiandu were in chaos. The armies of the heavenly court guarding Xuandu were thrown into chaos by the chaotic stars and constellations. The ships of the heavenly river navy guarding the heavenly river were blown away by the turbulent heavenly river. Countless heavenly soldiers and generals were thrown into the starry sky. It was difficult for them to stabilize their bodies. The ancestral court has changed. The seven heavenly venerates stood up and looked at the ancestral court. Langxian Celestial Emperor cried out, "It's the incense hall. The seal I left in the incense hall has been touched. Mine has been touched too." Concubine Gao Tian's expression changed drastically. She quickly stood up and urged the soul-slaying platform of the ancestral court to leave. She said angrily, "Heavenly Venerate Mu is courting death." The other heavenly venerates looked at each other and followed her toward the ancestral court. In the jade capital of the ancestral court, the incense-wearing hall was embedded in a Tao tree. The Tao fruit of that tree was hanging at the entrance of the hall. The Tao fruit and the remaining seal of the incense-wearing hall were still colliding. They were both trying to destroy each other. At this moment, something was squirming under a pile of broken bricks and tiles. After a moment, Wei Suifeng and big-headed Xu Jun climbed up from the rubble and dusted themselves off. Shujun looked around and saw that many buildings had collapsed in the jade capital of the ancestral court. He couldn't help but mutter, "So Celestial Master Mu is from a famous sect. His ability to demolish everything wherever he goes is still not as good as yours." Wei Suifeng said indifferently, "Of course. I've been demolishing buildings from the Long Han till now. In fact, my reputation is undeserved." The two looked at each other and laughed out loud. Amidst the laughter, Shu Jun looked around and the smile on his face gradually froze. Even his laughter became softer and softer. Finally, it could not be heard anymore. They saw a great river of primal chaos appearing in front of them. The river was filled with primal chaos energy. It was vast and mighty, and no one knew where it flowed to. Wei Suifeng laughed and said, "This time, aren't you afraid that the 10th Heavenly Venerate won't enter the Incense Burner Palace and get rid of that Miluo Palace's original saint? Shujun, it's time for us to leave." Shujun. He sized up Shujun's face and revealed a suspicious look. "You couldn't have gotten lost, right?" Shujun woke up. He laughed and said, "How could I have gotten lost? Ha 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 ha. I am one of the 3 great godly monarchs of the immemorial era. How could I have gotten lost? It's just that I have never been here before." "Master Wei, does your geographical map really work? Will someone really come and save us?"